The ballroom was full of champagne and chandeliers and people who believed they were completely safe. They were wrong. Ethan Cole saw it before anyone else did. The way the man near the east corridor held his body too still, the way his eyes never touched the food or the wine or the women in expensive dresses. They touched exits. They touched the stage. They touched the back of Victoria Sterling's head. Ethan had spent years learning to read rooms like that. He'd spent even longer trying to forget that he knew how. He tightened his grip on the mop handle and watched the man watching her, and understood, with the quiet certainty of someone who had seen this exact moment before, that somebody in this room was going to die tonight if he didn't move. Before we go any further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications, because this channel is where the stories that keep you up at night live. Every week, we bring you cinematic tales of ordinary people caught in extraordinary moments. Love, survival, betrayal, and the kind of courage that doesn't announce itself. Drop a like on this video and leave a comment telling me what city and country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now settle in, because this one is going to take everything you've got. The Meridian Grand Hotel did not hire people like Ethan Cole because they admired him. They hired him because he showed up on time, asked no questions, and accepted $11.40 an hour without complaint. That was the whole arrangement. He pushed the cart, he emptied the bins, he mopped the sections of marble floor that the guests walked across without ever looking down, and at the end of every shift he drove home to a two-bedroom apartment on Tremont Street where a 7-year-old girl named Lily was usually asleep with one arm hanging off the mattress and a stuffed rabbit named Gerald tucked under her chin. That was his life. He'd built it deliberately, the way you build something that's meant to hold weight without drawing attention. For 3 years, it had held. The night of the Meridian Grand's annual technology gala, the third Thursday of October, 52 degrees outside and raining in the thin, miserable way Boston did in autumn. Ethan was on the overnight rotation. His shift started at 9. By 9:15, he had already refilled the supply cart, replaced 2 burned-out bulbs in the service corridor, and been invisible to approximately 400 people in formal wear without trying very hard. He was good at invisible. The gala itself occupied the grand ballroom and the 2 adjoining reception rooms on the second floor. Ethan had worked enough of these events to know the rhythm. The first hour was all arrival and circling, people locating their importance relative to each other. The second hour was dinner and speeches nobody fully listened to. The third hour was when the bar lines got long and the conversations got real. By midnight, the serious ones had clustered in corners with their phones out, and the rest were hunting for coats. He kept his cart near the service door at the east end of the mezzanine, close enough to reach the ballroom quickly if something spilled, far enough back that no one thought about him. That was the trick with service work. You had to exist in exactly the right amount. He noticed the woman first because of the way the room arranged itself around her. Victoria Sterling was 30 years old and stood near the center of the ballroom with the particular stillness of someone who had learned to hold a room by not chasing it. She was in a dark navy dress, nothing theatrical, her hair pulled back clean. She was talking to a pair of older men in gray suits. One of them kept touching his lapel in that way men did when they were performing confidence they didn't entirely feel. And she was listening to them with her head tilted just slightly, which made them both believe she found them fascinating. Ethan had seen photographs of her, not because he followed tech industry news, but because the Meridian Grand's event coordinator had circulated a guest sheet to the overnight staff 2 days earlier with notes on which attendees required particular discretion. Victoria Sterling, CEO of Arlen Systems, had been listed near the top. Handle with care. Minimal eye contact. Do not initiate conversation. He hadn't thought much about it at the time. He thought about it now, watching the man near the east corridor. The man had arrived at 8:53. Ethan had been near the service entrance when he came through. Not the main guest entrance, but the secondary one off the parking structure, which required a badge. The man was in a suit that fit correctly and had the gala's lanyard around his neck, and nothing about him would have flagged to anyone paying ordinary attention. Ethan was not paying ordinary attention. The suit was right, but the shoes were wrong. Not wrong in an obvious way. Wrong in the way that someone who'd worn a specific kind of footwear for years couldn't quite correct even when the outfit changed. The soles were thick, and the lacing was tight, and the man walked on the balls of his feet in a way that dress shoes didn't really allow for, so he'd compensated slightly, adjusted his stride, and 99 people out of 100 would have looked at him and seen nothing. Ethan was the 100th person. He watched the man for 11 minutes. In that time, the man accepted a glass of sparkling water he never drank, spoke briefly to a woman Ethan couldn't see well, and positioned himself at the east corner of the ballroom with a sight line to Victoria Sterling that was nearly unobstructed. There was a second man. Ethan found him at 9:34, standing near the far side of the stage where the evening's panel discussion would begin in 20 minutes. This one was thicker through the shoulders, and he kept his right hand loose at his side with the practiced idleness of someone who'd spent years keeping his hand near something. Ethan set his mop against the wall and stood very still for a moment. He thought about Lily. He did this sometimes when the old part of his brain woke up and started running calculations. He thought about her face specifically, the gap in her front teeth from the one she'd lost in August, the way she scrunched her nose when she was trying to work out a math problem, the sound she made in her sleep that was almost a word but never quite got there. He used her as a counterweight, had for years. Then he thought, 2 men, coordinated positions, 1 primary target, and no one in this room has any idea. He picked up the mop. The panel discussion began at 9:50 with a moderator who had clearly overprepared and 4 panelists who had underprepared, and the ballroom audience settled into the slightly glazed attention of people who were being informed rather than entertained. Victoria Sterling was the 3rd panelist from the left. She spoke with precision and without filler words, which was unusual enough that people actually listened when she talked. Ethan positioned his cart near the service door and watched both men. The one near the east corridor, Ethan was thinking of him as East, had moved twice since 9:15. Each move brought him 6 to 8 feet closer to the stage. He was doing it slowly enough that it read as natural drift, the kind of unconscious repositioning people did at crowded events. But it wasn't unconscious. The shoulder man, West, hadn't moved. He was anchored, which meant he was coverage, not approach. He was there to hold a lane open or cut one off, depending on how things went. There would be a third. There was always a third. Ethan found him at 10:07, near the main lighting panel beside the north entrance. This one wasn't even trying to blend into the event. He was standing with his back to the ballroom, facing the corridor, and his hand was inside his jacket. There it is, Ethan thought. He pulled out his phone and called the front desk. "This is Cole, overnight maintenance. I need to report a potential safety issue in the ballroom. Possible unauthorized personnel near the lighting controls, north entrance." The woman on the other end said, "Sir, the gala is a private event. All guests have been vetted." "I understand that. I'm telling you there's a man standing at the lighting panel with his hand inside his jacket, and he has not moved in 4 minutes. You can have security check it or not. That's your call." He hung up. He didn't think they'd move fast enough. Hotels moved at hotel speed, which was professional and courteous and almost never adequate for the thing that was actually about to happen. He was already in motion when the lights went out. It wasn't a flicker. It was total. The kind of deliberate cut that took out not just the overheads, but the ambient lighting, the exit signs, the panel glow, everything. 400 people went from cocktail party to complete darkness in under a second, and the sound that came out of them was a particular mixture of surprise and the early edge of fear, the moment before anyone knows if they should laugh or run. Ethan ran. Not away. Toward the stage. He knew the ballroom's geography, the way he knew every floor of this hotel, not because he'd studied it for any operational reason, but because he'd mopped it 40-plus times and your legs learned things your mind didn't bother to catalog. He went low and moved on memory, cutting between tables by the feel of the chairs, and the screaming hadn't even started yet when he reached the stage steps. He could hear East moving. The man was good, quiet, purposeful, working from a memorized approach just like Ethan was. But he was navigating around 400 disoriented people, and Ethan was navigating around furniture he knew. Ethan got there first. He found Victoria by the sound of her voice. She hadn't screamed. She was saying to the panelist beside her, "Stay down, get behind the podium, get low," in a controlled voice that most people wouldn't have managed in that moment. Ethan came up from her left, got a hand on her arm, said close to her ear, "I work here. I need you to move with me right now. Don't stop moving." She said, "Who are right now?" She moved. He pulled her off the stage on the far side, away from East's approach vector, and went for the service door he'd been positioned near for the last hour. Behind them, he could hear the crowd noise building into real panic now. People shouting, chairs scraping. Somewhere near the east wall, a table going over. East had realized his target was gone. That gave them maybe 40 seconds before the man recalibrated. Ethan hit the service door with his shoulder, and they went through into the utility corridor. Concrete floor, fluorescent backup lighting that flickered on from the emergency generator, the smell of cleaning supplies and old cardboard. He pulled the door shut and got Victoria moving down the corridor before she'd fully registered the transition. "The stairs," he said. "End of the corridor, left." "There are more of them," she said. She wasn't asking. Her voice was different now, still controlled, but tight in the way of someone managing a significant amount of adrenaline. "I saw at least 2 before the lights went out. 3 that I counted." She looked at him. Even in the weak emergency lighting, he could see the calculation in her expression, the rapid, unsentimental assessment of someone trying to determine who he actually was. "You're the janitor," she said. "Yes." "You counted 3 armed operatives in a ballroom full of civilians before I did, and you were already moving when the lights went out. Keep moving." "That's not a janitor thing." "Stairs," he said. "Left." She went, but she didn't stop looking at him. Go on. They came out through the loading dock at the hotel's north side into the thin October rain. Ethan had grabbed his jacket from the cart hook on the way through, an old reflex, cover against weather, cover against cameras, and he handed it to Victoria without thinking about it because she was in a sleeveless dress and the temperature was 52 degrees, and that was just a practical problem with a practical solution. She took it without comment, which told him something about her. He'd left his car 3 blocks away in a public lot. Another old reflex, nothing close, nothing traceable to a fixed point. They moved fast and he kept her on his left, between himself and the buildings, and watched the street with the peripheral attention that never fully switched off, no matter how many years you put between yourself and the work that built it. She kept pace without complaint. Heels on wet pavement, and she adjusted her stride and said nothing about it. In the car, she sat with her hands in her lap and her back straight and waited until he'd done a single loop of the surrounding blocks, checking, just checking, before she spoke. "You need to tell me who you are," she said. "Ethan Cole. I work night maintenance at the Meridian Grand. I've been there 3 years. And before that?" He looked at her. In the green glow of a traffic light, she looked composed and exhausted, and something else he couldn't name yet, the expression of someone carrying something heavy for a very long time. "Before that," he said, "is a longer conversation." "I think we have time." He thought about where to take her. Not his apartment. Lily was there, asleep, Gerald tucked under her chin, and whatever this was, it was not coming through that door tonight or any night. I thought about the people he still trusted, the ones whose names had survived the years of distance he'd deliberately kept between himself and his old life. Clara Bennett lived in Cambridge. She was an attorney. She owned a brownstone with a parking structure and a back entrance, and she'd once told him, over coffee at a diner on Commonwealth Avenue, that if he ever needed a place to think without anyone knowing where he was, the key was under the 3rd planter on the left. He hadn't thought he'd ever need it. He pointed the car toward the bridge. "We're going somewhere safe," he said. "Safe from what exactly? I need to know if you understand what you pulled me out of back there. Because if you think those men were just security contractors who got a little aggressive, then they weren't contractors," he said. She went quiet. "The one near your east side knew your movement patterns. He wasn't there to grab you or create an incident. He was positioned for a clean approach in darkness, with the exit already cleared." He kept his eyes on the road. "Someone gave those men a profile, a schedule. Your seat position on the panel, that's not improvised, that's planned." She was quiet for almost a full block. "How long have you known something was wrong?" "About 45 minutes before the lights went out." "And you didn't—" She stopped, reconsidered. "You stayed at your post and watched them instead of—" "I called the front desk. That's not—" "I know it's not enough. I made a judgment call about when to move, and I was close enough to the stage that it worked." He paused. "If I'd pulled you out early, in the light, with 400 people watching and those men still in position, it could have gone differently." She thought about that. "You've run extractions before," she said. Not an accusation, just a statement of something she was working out. "Like I said, longer conversation." She leaned back against the headrest and looked at the rain on the windshield, And for the first time since they'd left the ballroom, she looked like someone who had used up a significant portion of what she had. "They've been building toward this for a while," she said quietly. Not really to him, to the window, to the dark city, going past. "I thought I had more time." Ethan didn't ask what she meant. He thought he already knew the shape of it. Not the details, not the specifics, but the shape. The kind of trouble that came from knowing something someone powerful didn't want known. The kind of trouble that planned three-man operations in ballrooms full of witnesses because the person who knew too much had become too dangerous to simply discredit. He'd seen that shape before. In other rooms, other cities, a different life. He kept driving. The rain got heavier as they crossed the bridge and the Cambridge skyline came up through the wet dark. His phone buzzed once in his jacket, which Victoria was still wearing, and she handed it to him without looking at the screen, still watching the window. He glanced at it. A text from his sister Margaret, in Vermont. A photograph. Lily in pajamas at a kitchen table, making a face at the camera, Gerald visible in the background on a chair. Margaret had written, "She conned me into a third glass of milk. Send help." Ethan looked at the photograph for 2 seconds. Then he put the phone in the cup holder and watched the road. He was not going to think about Lily right now. He couldn't afford to. He would put her somewhere safe in the back of his mind where she always was, where she'd been for 7 years, the thing he'd built all of this for, and he would deal with what was in front of him. Clara Bennett's brownstone sat at the end of a short private drive. The windows were dark. He pulled in slowly, cut the headlights, and sat for a moment with the engine idling. "This is private property," Victoria said. "I know the owner." "Does the owner know we're coming?" "No." He got out of the car and went to the third planter on the left. The key was there. Behind him, after a moment, he heard the car door open and Victoria Sterling stepping out into the Cambridge rain. Composed, calculating, watching him with the look she'd had since the service corridor, the one he recognized because he'd worn it himself in rooms that changed things. The look of someone realizing that the person in front of them was not at all what they'd appeared to be. He opened the door and held it. She walked past him into the dark hallway, and he followed her in and locked it behind them. Outside, the rain came down on a city that had no idea what had happened in the ballroom of the Meridian Grand, or why, or what the woman who'd survived it knew that had made her worth killing. But Ethan knew they'd figure that out next. Clara Bennett did not own the kind of brownstone you found in a real estate catalog. It was narrow and old, and the radiators knocked in cold weather, and the kitchen ceiling had a water stain shaped roughly like the state of Florida that Clara had been meaning to fix for 3 years. What it had was a back entrance, a parking structure with a mechanical gate, and the particular quality of privacy that came from being on a street where the neighbors had learned not to look out their windows at unusual hours because Clara's clients sometimes arrived that way. Ethan had met Clara 7 years ago through a veterans legal aid organization, back when he'd first arrived in Boston with a duffel bag, a 7-week-old infant, and no clear idea of how any of this was going to work. She'd helped him establish guardianship documentation for Lily. She'd done it without charging him and without asking the kinds of questions that would have required him to lie directly to her face, which he'd appreciated more than he'd known how to say at the time. He'd repaid it slowly, in the way people repaid things when money wasn't possible. Showing up when a pipe burst at 2 in the morning, fixing the gate mechanism when it jammed, being the person she called when she needed someone reliable and discreet. They'd settled into a friendship that neither of them had planned for, the kind that built itself out of practical necessity and then turned into something that mattered before either of them noticed. He texted her from the entryway while Victoria stood in Clara's front hallway with water dripping from the hem of his jacket, looking at the framed prints on the wall with the careful attention of someone keeping their mind occupied. "At your place. Needed somewhere. 2 of us. We'll explain." Clara's response came back in under a minute. "Guest room is made up. Kitchen has food. Alarm code is the same. I'm in court at 7. We'll talk after." He put the phone away and turned on the hallway light, low. "We can stay here tonight," he said. "The owner is someone I trust." Victoria turned from the wall. She'd been looking at a pencil sketch, Boston Harbor, rough and expressive, something Clara had picked up at an estate sale. "How many people do you trust?" "Not many." "That's either a character trait or a professional habit." "Probably both." She followed him into the kitchen. He found the light over the stove and left the overheads off. old habit, less visible from outside, and opened the refrigerator. Clara had the kind of refrigerator that reflected someone who ate well when she remembered to eat, which meant there was good cheese and leftover takeout and a container of soup and not much in between. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "No." Victoria sat down at the kitchen table and set her phone on the surface face up. The screen was dark. "My phone has been off since 9:48. I pulled the battery in the car." He looked at her. "When did you learn to do that?" 18 months ago." She said it flatly, without drama, the way you said something that had become routine through repetition rather than comfort. "When I first understood what I was dealing with." He put the soup on the stove without asking again whether she was hungry, because she looked like someone who hadn't eaten a real meal in longer than tonight, and he'd learned with Lily that sometimes people needed feeding even when they said they didn't. "Tell me what you're dealing with," he said. She looked at him across the kitchen, the man who'd pulled her off a stage in the dark, who'd known which exit to use before the lights went out, who drove in careful loops around city blocks out of habits he clearly hadn't chosen tonight. She was deciding something. He could see it in the way she sat, the particular stillness of someone running a calculation. "You first," she said. "What?" "You said it was a longer conversation. I've been waiting for it since the bridge." She folded her hands on the table. Her nail polish was chipped on her left thumb, he noticed. Something about that small imperfection made her more real to him than anything else had so far. "You moved through that ballroom like you'd done room clearance before. You counted 3 operatives that my own security detail, which I'd specifically instructed to be present tonight, completely missed. You have a contact with a private property and a hidden key, and you told me nothing about any of it. I pulled the battery out of my phone, and you didn't react, which means you already knew that was the right call." She paused. "So, you first." The soup was beginning to heat. He stirred it once and turned the flame down. "I did 6 years in the Navy," he said. "The last 4 were with SEAL Team 6, mostly classified operations, some of which I can't talk about and some of which I won't." She absorbed that without visible reaction. "And you left?" 7 years ago, yes." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. The radiator in the corner knocked twice and then settled. "There was a mission. The details aren't something I'm going to put on the table right now. What I'll tell you is that afterward, I couldn't reconcile what the work had become with what I'd believed I was doing it for. So I walked." "People don't just walk away from that world." "No, they don't." He found bowls in Clara's cabinet. "I didn't walk cleanly. I had conversations I shouldn't have had to have, signed documents I shouldn't have had to sign, and spent about 4 months wondering if someone was going to make a decision about me that I didn't have a vote in. Eventually, they decided I wasn't worth the problem." He set a bowl in front of her. "Or that's what I chose to believe. It was easier to build a life on that." Victoria looked at the soup. Then she picked up the spoon and ate, which was the answer to the question he hadn't asked again. "And the daughter," she said. "Her name is Lily. She's 7. He sat down across from her. "Her mother was someone I knew before deployment. It was complicated. When Lily was 6 weeks old, I was the only one left." He said it the way he always said it when he had to say it at all, straight, with no extra weight on it, because the extra weight was always there anyway, and adding more didn't help anyone. "I went to Boston because I didn't know where else to go, and because no one from my old life knew I had any connection to this city." "You were hiding." "I was protecting. There's a difference, even if it looks the same from the outside." She ate a few more spoonfuls of soup. He watched her think. "The men tonight," she said. "You said they weren't contractors." "The formation was military. The approach was planned by someone who understood how to neutralize a protective detail and isolate a target in a crowd. That's not private security work. That's a different level of training, which means someone with connections to that level of training hired them, or is running them directly." She set the spoon down. "His name is Gordon Hale. He runs a defense technology corporation called Sentinel Arc. They hold contracts with 4 federal agencies, 2 of which directly oversee critical infrastructure cybersecurity. In the last 6 years, Sentinel Arc has been awarded over $3 billion in government work." She said it without looking at any notes, without hesitation, in the voice of someone who had memorized these facts so thoroughly they'd become part of her skeleton. "What I found, what I've spent 18 months documenting, is that buried inside Sentinel Arc's architecture work, for those federal systems is a persistent access layer, a hidden door. It wasn't accidental, it was designed, built deliberately, and it has been actively used. Ethan was very still. Used to do what? To copy. Mostly data, movement of classified personnel, security protocols, infrastructure vulnerabilities. Some of it has shown up in foreign intelligence assessments that congressional investigators have been trying to trace for 2 years. Some of it is financial. Contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars going to shell companies that trace back, through 4 or 5 layers, to the same cluster of private interests. She looked at him directly. Gordon Hale isn't just building systems for the federal government. He's selling what those systems see. The kitchen was very quiet. How did you find it? Ethan asked. Arlen Systems was brought in 18 months ago to conduct a third-party security audit on a federal data network. We weren't supposed to go deep. It was a surface compliance review, checkbox work, the kind of engagement that looks rigorous and isn't. But I have engineers who are thorough past the point of what the contract required. And one of them, a woman named Dara, found an anomaly in the access logs that didn't match anything in the official architecture documentation. Victoria's jaw tightened slightly. I told her to stop, to back out cleanly and not pull on that thread, because I already understood what she'd found, and I understood what it meant. But she'd already pulled. We both had. Something crossed her face. Not quite guilt, but close enough to its neighborhood. I spent 3 weeks telling myself it wasn't our problem, that we'd document the anomaly, flag it through proper channels, and let the relevant agencies sort it out. That's the professional thing, the thing that keeps a company's federal contracts intact and its CEO out of very dangerous situations. What changed? She looked at her hands. Dara's apartment was broken into 2 weeks after she found the anomaly. Nothing taken, nothing damaged, but someone had gone through her work files. She paused. She didn't know I knew about the break-in until I told her, because I'd also had a visit. Someone sat outside my building in an unmarked car for 6 days. When I photographed the plate, it came back to a logistics company that didn't exist. That's when you knew it was already too late to stay out of it. I knew it was too late when Dara found the access log. I just hadn't admitted it to myself yet. She picked up the spoon again, turned it over in her fingers without eating. So I made a decision. If we were already in danger, then the only leverage we had was the evidence itself. Making it go away didn't make us safe. Making it public and irrefutable, getting it to the right people before they could discredit us or make us disappear, that was the only play. Ethan sat with that for a moment. 18 months, he said. That's a long time to carry something like this. Yes. The word came out with a weight she'd probably been carrying for exactly that long. Who knows what you have? Right now, 3 people. Dara, my general counsel, James Whitfield, and a congressional investigator named Adrian Cole, who I've been in contact with for 6 weeks. She glanced at him. No relation, I assume. No. He almost said something else and didn't. Is Adrian's investigation independent of the agencies Sentinel Arc has contracts with? She's attached to a subcommittee that doesn't have direct oversight of those agencies. Yes, it was the first thing I checked. And the evidence itself, where is it? Distributed. Copies in 3 locations, none of them digital in the obvious sense. I'm not going to tell you where tonight. I'm not asking you to. She looked at him. You're not, are you? Not a question, an observation. Most people in your position would push. Most people in my position aren't in your kitchen at midnight trying to figure out how to keep you alive. He leaned forward. The men tonight, they weren't sent to grab you. You understand that? She met his eyes. Yes. Which means someone made a decision that the evidence is already distributed enough that taking it from you isn't viable. The only option left is removing you. I've known that for about 3 months. She said it evenly, but her hand was flat on the table with a stillness that wasn't entirely natural. That's when the approach shifted. Before it was surveillance and intimidation and one attempt to compromise one of my board members into pushing me out of Arlen. When that didn't work, they stopped trying to be subtle. 3 months, he said. What have you been doing for 3 months? Working, running my company, preparing for the summit in New York. A faint, slightly grim shape came into her expression. And attending galas, apparently. Why the gala tonight? Because I was invited. Because not going would have signaled that I was afraid. And because I thought, incorrectly, it turns out, that a room full of 400 witnesses was reasonable protection. They didn't care about witnesses. No, she said quietly. They didn't. He got up and took both bowls to the sink. The soup had gone mostly cold, but she'd eaten enough of it. He ran the tap and stood with his back to her for a moment, looking at the water. The thing that was sitting in the back of his mind, the thing he'd been turning over since the service corridor, was the formation in the ballroom, the approach vector. The way the third man had been positioned at the lighting panel with the kind of practiced readiness that came from a specific type of training. He'd seen that specific type of training before. Not in a ballroom. In other places. In the years before Boston, before Lily, before he'd signed whatever he'd signed and chosen a mop over a rifle. He didn't say any of that yet, because what he was thinking had implications that required him to be more certain before he put it in the room between them. He turned around. You said Adrienne's investigation is 6 weeks in. How solid is she? Solid enough that she's the one who came to me, not the other way around. She'd been tracing the shell company money for 8 months before we made contact. We compared notes and realized we were looking at the same thing from different angles. Does she know about tonight? She'll know by morning. I have a secure contact protocol. I'll need to talk to her. Victoria looked at him steadily. Why? Because what happened tonight wasn't a security failure. It was an operation. Someone ran an intelligence assessment, identified the venue's vulnerabilities, placed assets, and executed with military-grade coordination. He held her gaze. That means someone either is or has direct access to someone who is, operating at a level that connects to the world I came from. And if that's true, then Adrienne's investigation has a much bigger problem than a corrupt defense contractor. The room was quiet enough that he could hear the rain still going outside and the distant sound of a car on the wet street. Victoria put her hands flat on the table and looked at them. Her composure was intact, but he could see the effort it was taking now, the slight tension in her shoulders, the way she'd stopped performing calm and was simply forcing herself to maintain it. How big? She said. Not quite a question. I don't know yet. That's why I need to talk to Adrienne. She nodded once. All right. Tonight you sleep. Both of us do. He said it practically, without making it gentle, because he didn't think she wanted gentle right now. Tomorrow, we figure out the next steps. You need to tell me everything about the summit in New York. Schedule, venue, who's confirmed your appearance. I'm not canceling the summit. I didn't ask you to. She blinked. That had surprised her. Good. He needed her to understand that he wasn't going to manage her the way people had probably been trying to manage her for 18 months. The summit is a platform, he said. 400 witnesses in a ballroom didn't stop them tonight. But 400 witnesses watching a live public address with the press present and a congressional investigator in the building is a different calculation. We just have to make sure we control enough of the variables. He paused. But that's tomorrow. Tonight you need to sleep. She stood up from the table with the slight, careful movement of someone whose body had absorbed more stress than it was showing and was now sending quiet invoices. The guest room. End of the hall on the right. I'll take the couch. She picked up her phone, battery still out, and looked at it for a second before setting it back down. Then she looked at him with that same direct, measuring expression she'd had since the service corridor, the one that was working something out. You said you walked away from your old life because you couldn't reconcile what it had become, she said. Yes. And now you're standing in someone else's kitchen at midnight planning operations again. He thought about that. I suppose I am. Does that bother you? He was quiet long enough that the radiator knocked again in the corner. What bothers me, he said, is that I was standing 40 feet away from a man trying to kill you for 11 minutes before I moved. I kept telling myself there were other options, that the hotel would handle it, that I was reading it wrong. He looked at the window, at the wet dark outside. I wasn't reading it wrong. You got there in time. 40 feet, he said, in a room full of people. If he'd been faster, or if the third man had moved first instead of the lighting, he stopped. I'm not going to do that. Do what? Run the alternate scenarios. It doesn't change anything. He said it firmly, the way you said something you were still in the process of convincing yourself of. Get some sleep. She held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she turned and walked down the hall, and he heard the guest room door open and close with a soft, careful click. He stood in Clara's kitchen for a while. He washed the bowls. He checked the locks on the back door and the side window and the door to the parking structure. He looked at his phone and at the photograph of Lily, making a face at the camera, and Gerald visible on a chair in the background. He thought about calling Margaret, his sister. It was well past midnight. Lily would be asleep. Margaret would be reading, probably, the way she always was when everyone else in the house was down. He typed instead, "Can Lily stay with you a few extra days? Work situation. We'll explain soon." Margaret's response, 3 minutes later. "Of course. She's fine. We made cookies today. She ate 4 of them and told me 4 was a reasonable number because she's 7 and 7 is more than 4, so she had room." He read that twice. He was still thinking about it when he set the phone down and lay back on Clara's couch, with the living room dark and the rain going outside and the old familiar sound of his own mind running through entry points and exit routes and the specific kind of arithmetic that he'd spent 7 years trying to stop doing in his sleep. It came back fast. That was the honest truth of it, and he didn't know yet whether that was a relief or a thing to be frightened of. Somewhere down the hall, Victoria Sterling was lying in a guest room in a stranger's house, in a city that had just tried to kill her, carrying 18 months of evidence that someone was willing to do operational military-level work to suppress. And she'd eaten the soup and said goodnight with that same composed, careful dignity that he suspected she'd been maintaining through things that would have broken other people. Not because she didn't feel them, but because she'd made a decision somewhere along the line that feeling them was something she did privately, on her own time, when the door was closed. He recognized that. He understood it in a way he couldn't have explained to anyone who hadn't learned the same habit. The couch was not comfortable. He'd slept on considerably worse. He closed his eyes and let the part of his brain that never fully stopped run its inventory of what he knew. 3 operatives, military coordination, an access architecture built into federal systems, a name, Gordon Hale, Sentinel Arc. And beneath all of that, the thing he hadn't said yet to Victoria because he needed to be wrong about it. The approach vector in the ballroom, the footwear. The way the third man had stood at the lighting panel with his right shoulder dropped by exactly the degree that indicated a specific kind of sidearm carry that was taught in exactly one training program that Ethan knew personally. He needed to be wrong. He lay in the dark and listened to the rain and worked very hard at being wrong. By the time he finally slept, just past 3 in the morning, he hadn't managed it. Clara came home at 6:45, which was earlier than she'd said, which meant she'd either checked her messages and come back specifically, or she'd had an early morning appearance scheduled that finished fast. She came in through the back with her briefcase and her coat still on, and found Ethan sitting at the kitchen table with coffee made and 2 mugs out. She stopped in the doorway and looked at him. Clara Bennett was 51 years old, with silver coming into dark hair she kept short and practical. And she had the look of someone who had seen most categories of human problem and developed precise responses to all of them. She looked at Ethan, then at the 2 mugs, then at the closed guest room door visible down the hallway. "How bad?" she said. "Complicated." "Are you hurt?" "No." "Is whoever's in my guest room hurt?" "No." She set her briefcase down and poured herself the coffee and sat across from him. "Is this connected to your past life or your current life?" "Both, I think." She drank, made a face at the temperature. He'd made it strong, the way she liked it, but it had been sitting. "Do I need to know details?" "Not yet. Possibly later." "I have a deposition at 2. I'm free by 5. "That might be enough time." She looked at him over the rim of the mug with the expression she'd had since he'd known her. Equal parts affection and careful assessment. The expression of someone who'd decided a long time ago that she trusted him and occasionally wondered if that was entirely wise. "Lily's in Vermont," she said. "Yes." "She's okay?" She ate 4 cookies and considered it a reasonable number. Clara almost smiled. "Smart kid." She stood up, smoothed her coat. "Guest room has towels in the cabinet above the toilet. There's bread and eggs. I'll be back by 5:30. She picked up her briefcase and then paused at the doorway. "Ethan." "Yeah. Whatever this is, you didn't cause it. I can tell from the way you're sitting that you're trying to decide if you did." "You didn't." He didn't answer that. She left. He sat with the second mug of coffee going cold across from him and listened to the brownstones settle around him in the early morning. And down the hall, after a few more minutes, he heard the guest room door open and Victoria Sterling's quiet, deliberate footsteps in the hallway. She appeared in the kitchen doorway in yesterday's clothes, her hair down now, and she looked at the coffee and then at him with the particular expression of someone who has slept exactly as much as their body would allow and woken up to find that none of it had been a dream. "There's a mug," he said. She came in and filled it and sat down. They were quiet together for a moment in the morning light. "I need to reach Adrian today," she said. "I know. And I need a phone. We'll get one. A clean one." He wrapped his hands around his own mug. "But first I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it as specifically as you can." She looked at him. "The men last night," he said. "Any of them, in the surveillance period, the 6 days outside your building, any interaction you've had over the last 18 months with anyone connected to this, did you ever see or encounter anyone who carried themselves like someone with a specific kind of military background? Not just trained, specifically trained, the way those men last night were trained." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "There was a man," she said slowly, "about 4 months ago. He approached one of my board members at a dinner, introduced himself as a consultant. My board member described him afterward as having, and I remember this specifically because I thought it was an odd way to put it, the politeness of someone who wasn't used to having to be polite." Ethan looked at her steadily. "Did he give a name?" "Marcus Vane," she said. The name landed in Ethan's chest like a stone dropped into still water. He kept his face exactly where it was. He picked up his coffee. He drank. "Does that name mean something to you?" Victoria said. He set the mug down. "It means," he said carefully, "that I was right about the thing I was hoping I was wrong about." She waited. Outside, Boston was waking up around Clara Bennett's brownstone. Car sounds, a siren somewhere far off. The ordinary layered noise of a city that didn't know what was moving through it. Ethan looked at the table for a moment, organizing something he'd been carrying since 3 in the morning into the shape it needed to take when he said it out loud. "Marcus Vane ran Black Site Logistics for a joint special operations unit I had indirect contact with in my last 2 years of service," he said. "He was officially a contractor. Practically, he was the person who made things disappear when an operation produced results that were politically inconvenient." He paused. "He was also one of the reasons I had the conversations that led to me signing the documents that led to me being here." Victoria's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did. "He's connected to Gordon Hale," she said. "He's more than connected. If Marcus Vane is in this, then Sentinel Arc isn't just a corporation that built a back door into federal systems." Ethan looked at her directly. "It's a structure that was built specifically by people who knew how to build structures that don't officially exist. That's a different animal than a corrupt contractor." The kitchen was very quiet. "That's why they're not worried about witnesses," Victoria said. "They've operated without worrying about witnesses before, in places where witnesses had even less protection than a Boston ballroom." He pulled the cold coffee mug closer. "Which means the evidence you have isn't just evidence of financial crime. It's evidence of something that people at a very specific level of power have spent years building and protecting, and they will not stop." "I know," she said. "I've known for a while." She said it without theater, without a tremor in her voice, and that steadiness told him everything about the kind of person she was and everything about how much it was costing her. "That's why I'm still going to New York." He nodded. "Then we need to build something they can't operate around," he said. "And I know someone who can help us cover the angles I can't cover alone." She looked at him. "Someone from your past life." "Someone I trust," he said, "which, as I told you last night, is a short list. But he's on it." She held his gaze. Then she nodded once, with the kind of decisiveness that came not from certainty, but from the particular courage of someone who had already decided they were going to see this through no matter what the next room contained. "All right," she said. "Then let's get a clean phone and call Adrian." Ethan stood up, outside the kitchen window. The rain had finally stopped and the morning light was doing what Boston morning light did in October, coming in low and pale and cold, the color of something that hadn't fully committed to being a new day yet. He thought, briefly, of Lily eating cookies in Vermont and Gerald on a chair in the background, and he put her where he always put her, safe in the back of his mind, the fixed point that everything else had to be arranged around. Then he turned toward the work. The clean phone cost $40 at a convenience store on Massachusetts Avenue, paid in cash, and Ethan drove 3 miles from Clara's brownstone before Victoria turned it on for the first time. She had Adrienne Cole's number memorized. She'd made a point of memorizing every number that mattered to her over the past 18 months, because phones got confiscated and phones got cloned and phones got left behind in situations that moved faster than the ability to retrieve them. Adrienne picked up on the second ring, which meant she'd been awake, which probably meant she'd already heard about the gala. She had. "I've been trying to reach you since 11:15, Adrienne said. Her voice was tight and controlled, the voice of someone managing a significant amount of worry by converting it directly into practical language. "The incident at the Meridian Grand is already in the police reports. 4 injured in the evacuation panic. No confirmed weapons found on scene, which means whoever ran that operation cleaned up after themselves before the first responders arrived." "They were there," Victoria said. 3 of them. "I had eyes on 2 before the lights went out." "Are you hurt?" "No." "Where are you?" "Not on a traced line, so I'll leave that part out for now." Victoria glanced at Ethan, who was driving with the steady, unhurried attention he seemed to apply to most things. "I'm with someone. Someone who helped me get out." A brief pause. "Who?" "His name is Ethan Cole. This is going to sound strange. He works at the hotel, night maintenance." Longer pause this time. Victoria. "I know how it sounds. He's former Navy SEAL Adrian. SEAL Team 6, 4 years. He made the 3 operatives before the lights went out and got me through the service corridor before the primary reached the stage." She kept her voice level. "He also recognized a name connected to this. Marcus Vane." The silence on the other end had a different quality now. "Say that again," Adrian said. "Marcus Vane. He approached my board member 4 months ago. Ethan knows who he is. Knew him from his service years. He says Vane ran black site logistics for a joint special operations unit. Hold on." The sound of movement, a door closing, the distinct shift in ambient noise of someone moving to a private space. "Okay, that name has come up in my investigation. Not prominently. He's 3 layers removed from the primary financial structure, but he's there. I flagged it 2 weeks ago, and I've been trying to trace the connection without tipping anything." "He's not 3 layers removed," Ethan said. He'd been listening without indicating that he was listening, which Victoria was beginning to understand was simply how he operated. "Put me on speaker." Victoria did. "Mr. Cole," Adrienne said carefully, "Vane doesn't show up prominently because that's by design. He operates in the layer between the corporate structure and the operational layer. He's the membrane. The money and the decisions flow through him, but he leaves almost no documentation because he spent years in environments where documentation was a liability." A pause. The fact that he approached Victoria's board member in person, using his actual name, means one of 2 things. Either he didn't consider her a serious enough threat at that point to bother being careful, or he was delivering a message he wanted her to receive. "A message saying what?" Adrienne asked. "That they knew who she was talking to, that her board was accessible, that the circle around her was smaller than she thought." The car was quiet for a moment except for road noise. "Both things were true," Victoria said. "I knew it when my board member told me about the dinner. I didn't know the name meant anything beyond the immediate warning." "It means Gordon Hale didn't build Sentinel Arc with corporate money and corporate ambition," Ethan said. "He built it with the architecture of something older, something that was already practiced at making things that shouldn't exist continue to not officially exist." He changed lanes without rushing it. "Adrienne, your investigation. How insulated is it from the agencies Sentinel Arc has contracts with?" "Fully insulated on paper. My subcommittee has no direct jurisdictional overlap." Paper insulation and actual insulation are different when Marcus Vane is involved. Another pause. "I'm aware of that. I've been routing everything through physical documentation only. No digital trail for the sensitive material." "Good. Keep it that way." He glanced at Victoria. "We need a meeting. The 3 of us, plus a federal contact. Someone in law enforcement who is both outside the contaminated agency network and senior enough to move when we hand them something solid. Do you have anyone like that?" "I have one name," Adrienne said slowly. "Elena Reyes. She's a supervisory special agent, and she's been running a parallel financial crimes investigation that bumped up against Sentinel Arc 6 months ago and got quietly redirected away. She was not happy about that. I've spoken to her twice off the record." "Can she be trusted?" "I believe so, but I believe so is the best I can give you." "That's enough for now." He looked at the road. Set up the meeting for today. Somewhere without cameras, without a reservation trail, without a connection to any of your regular professional contacts. A place that isn't obvious. I'll find somewhere. One more thing. He said it with the particular evenness of someone raising something they know is going to land hard. Victoria's appearance at the New York summit. It's in 8 days. We're not canceling it. The silence from Adrienne had texture to it. Ethan, she said finally, the summit is exactly the kind of high-profile, fixed-location, pre-announced event that makes security. I know what it makes. That's why we're not canceling. His voice was patient, not argumentative. If Victoria disappears from public view now, 2 things happen. First, Sentinel Arc reads it as confirmation that their operation at the Meridian Grand achieved its secondary objective, removing her from the conversation. Second, the summit happens without her, which means the platform disappears and the evidence stays in distributed storage with no public pressure creating a window for action. He paused. The summit is the reason we need to be in New York. We're going to control it rather than avoid it. Victoria was watching him. He hadn't discussed any of this with her this morning. He'd worked it out, she understood, somewhere between 3 a.m. and 6:45 when Clara came home, lying on a couch in the dark. All right, Adrienne said, reluctant but present. I'll set up the meeting for this afternoon. I'll send the location to this number. Delete it from your sent messages after. I know, Adrienne said, with the faint tone of someone who had been doing this carefully for a long time and didn't need to be reminded. Victoria, are you actually all right? Victoria looked out this passenger window at the Boston street going past. The ordinary morning weight of it. A woman walking a dog, a delivery truck double parked, 2 pigeons having a disagreement on a trash can. I'm functioning, she said. That's not what I asked. It's what I've got right now. A beat. Okay, I'll be in touch within the hour. The call ended. Victoria held the cheap phone in her lap and watched the city. Ethan drove without filling the silence, which she was beginning to appreciate about him. The absence of the particular masculine impulse to paper over difficult moments with noise. You worked out the New York argument overnight, she said. I worked out several things overnight. And you didn't ask me. I would have asked you. We hadn't gotten to it yet. He made a turn. Do you disagree with the reasoning? She thought about it honestly. No, I disagree with the risk to the people around me. I don't disagree with the logic. The risk exists whether you go to New York or not. The only question is whether you choose where the confrontation happens or let them choose. I know. She turned the phone over in her hands. I've known that for a while. It's easier to know it abstractly than to sit next to someone who's going to be in the room when it happens and tell them it's the right call. He was quiet for a moment. I've been in those rooms before. I chose to be in them. This isn't your obligation. No, he said. It's not. He said it straight, without dramatizing it either direction, the way he said most things. But I'm in it now, and walking away from something I'm in the middle of isn't something I do well. She looked at him. The profile of a man who was not quite what any single category could hold, who'd built a careful, contained life around a 7-year-old girl and a mop and a 2-bedroom apartment, and who was now doing, with complete apparent calm, the thing he'd spent 7 years walking away from. Tell me about Lily, she said. He glanced at her. A brief, slightly surprised look. Why? Because you've been carrying her in your head since last night. I can see it every time your phone comes out. She wasn't being intrusive, she was being direct, which felt like the only register that worked between them. And because I want to understand who you actually are. Not the SEAL, not the janitor. He was quiet long enough that she thought he might simply decline. She lost a tooth in August, he said finally. Upper front left. She's been waiting for the other one to go because she wants to whistle through the gap, and she can't quite get the geometry right with just one. A pause. She's in Vermont with my sister right now. Margaret has a farmhouse. Lily thinks the chickens have specific personalities, and she's named all 6 of them. What are their names? The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to it. Kevin, Kevin 2, Dr. Kevin, Bad Kevin, Margaret, which my sister takes personally, and one she just calls the problem. Victoria almost laughed. It came out of her before she'd planned it, brief and real, and she could feel it loosening something in her chest that had been locked since the ballroom. "She sounds like a good kid," she said. "She's a complicated kid." He said it with the unambiguous warmth of a parent who found the complication entirely worthwhile. "She's also 7, so she thinks she's significantly more prepared for most situations than she is. It's going to be a useful quality, eventually." "Sounds familiar?" Victoria said. He glanced at her again. "Yeah," he said, "it does." They drove back toward Clara's brownstone in the kind of quiet that had found its footing. Adrienne sent the location at 10:47, a Vietnamese restaurant in Alston that opened for lunch at 11. Small, family-run, no reservation system, no cameras visible from the street, and crucially not a place that appeared in any professional directory connected to Adrienne, Victoria, or Clara Bennett. They arrived at 11:15. Adrienne was already there, in a corner booth with her back to the wall and a cup of tea she hadn't touched. She was in her early 40s, with close-cropped natural hair and the kind of composure that came not from calm, but from long practice, containing things that weren't calm at all. She stood when Victoria came in, and they held each other briefly. The tight, careful embrace of two people who'd been through enough shared stress that physical contact had become necessary language. Elena Reyes arrived 4 minutes later. She was compact and dark-haired and moved through the restaurant with the habitual spatial awareness of someone who had spent a long professional life entering rooms where things might be wrong. She looked at Ethan when she sat down with the direct, unapologetic assessment of a person taking a professional measurement. "You're the maintenance worker," she said. "I was," Ethan said. "Were," she repeated. Not quite a question. "I think my schedule at the Meridian Grand is probably complicated at the moment." Elena almost smiled. "I pulled what I could on you in the last 40 minutes. Ethan Cole, Navy, honorably discharged. Nothing interesting in the civilian record. Full custody of 1 minor, current employment." She looked at him. "Night maintenance. But there's a gap in the 7 years before Boston that is cleaner than any civilian gap I've ever seen, which means someone made it clean. Or I'm very boring." "You're not very boring." She set her phone face down on the table and moved her coffee aside. "I've been watching Sentinel Arc for 6 months. My investigation was pulled in March when one of my supervisors determined that the relevant financial activity fell outside our jurisdiction. It didn't fall outside our jurisdiction. Someone made a phone call, and my case file got reassigned to a unit that will sit on it until everyone involved has retired." She looked around the table with the look of someone who'd been waiting for this particular conversation. "I've been building a parallel record on my own time since April. I want to know what you have." It took 2 hours. Victoria laid out 18 months of documentation in structured, careful sequence, and Adrienne wove her 8 months of financial tracing through it, and Elena asked questions that were precise and occasionally uncomfortable and never redundant. Ethan sat at the edge of the conversation and said very little for the first 90 minutes, eating a bowl of pho that had arrived without anyone ordering it, because the woman running the restaurant had clearly decided they looked like people who needed feeding. At the 2-hour mark, Elena sat back and looked at the table. "Okay," she said. "Okay meaning what?" Adrienne asked. "Okay meaning what you have, combined with what I have, combined with what I can now request through channels that Sentinel Arc has not yet contaminated, because there are some, even if there aren't many, is enough to open a formal investigation that would be very difficult to redirect." She paused. "Not impossible to redirect. Difficult." "Difficult is what we have," Victoria said. "The summit," Ethan said. It was the first thing he'd said in 40 minutes. All 3 women looked at him. "Walk me through the venue. Full layout if you have it, and whatever you know about the confirmed attendees and the press arrangements." Adrienne opened a folder. "The Harrington Convention Center in Midtown Manhattan. The main hall seats 1,100. Victoria's keynote is scheduled for the second day, 11 a.m. It's the anchor event of the summit. The room will be full. Press pool is confirmed, including 2 live stream outlets. Security arrangements? Standard event security. The summit organization has contracted a private firm, 12 personnel." Ethan looked at the venue diagram Adrienne slid across the table. He studied it for about 90 seconds without speaking. "The loading dock on the west side," he said. "It connects to the service corridor on the sublevel, which runs the full length of the building and has 4 access points into the main hall. The event security will cover the main entrances. They won't have consistent coverage on the sub-level access points during a full-capacity event. He looked up. That's where they'll come from. You can determine that from a floor plan? Elena asked. I can determine that from every room I've ever cleared. He wasn't being impressive about it. He was being factual. I need to walk the venue before the summit. 2 days ahead minimum. Ideally 3. And I need someone to cover angles I can't cover alone. Who? Adrian asked. He was quiet for a moment. His name is Ray Cutter. We served together for 3 years. He's been private security since discharge, legitimate work, and he's the most situationally capable person I trust outside this table. He looked at Victoria. With your permission. It was the phrasing that landed, the permission, the direct address, the absence of assumption. She'd been managed and handled and strategically positioned for 18 months by people who genuinely believed they were helping her. Ethan asked permission. Yes, she said. I'll reach him today. Elena gathered the papers into a careful stack. I can create a secure documentation chain that runs through my office, but outside the contaminated reporting structure. It will take me 4 days to establish. By the time the summit happens, we'll have a formal record that will survive any attempt to redirect or suppress it. She looked at Victoria directly. The moment you walk off that stage, I want everything. Every copy, every location, every file. We move simultaneously. Agreed, Victoria said. There's one more thing. Elena's expression shifted slightly. Marcus Vane. I've been trying to get eyes on his current location for 3 weeks. After what happened at the Meridian Grand, he'll go to ground. He'll be in New York, Ethan said. Everyone looked at him. He doesn't trust operations to run without him in the room. It's how he's always worked. He'll be there. A pause. Which is both a problem and an opportunity, depending on how it goes. Elena studied him. You know him personally. I know his operational habits. There's a difference. Is there? He met her eyes. Yes. She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once with the practiced neutrality of someone filing information for later consideration. All right. New York in 8 days. In the meantime, Victoria needs to be somewhere stable and off the traceable grid. She can remain at the current location, Ethan said. It's secure and unconnected to any of her known addresses. Victoria looked at him. Clara's brownstone. The water stain shaped like Florida and the knocking radiators and the third planter on the left. Clara won't mind, she said. Clara will have opinions, and then she'll say yes. He called Ray Cutter that evening from the parking structure behind the brownstone, standing between a concrete pillar and Clara's decade-old Volvo, with the October cold coming in through the open structure in waves. Ray picked up on the third ring with, I was wondering when you'd surface. You heard? Hotel ballroom in Boston, 3 possible armed operatives, a CEO and a night janitor who disappeared through the service exit before the police arrived. Yeah, I heard. The voice on the other end was unhurried and slightly rough. The voice of a man who had learned somewhere along the line that urgency was a resource you spent carefully. I assumed it was you because no one else I know works hotel maintenance and moves like that. I need your eyes in New York. Summit security for a keynote address. 8 days. Who's the threat? Organized, military trained, coordinated by a man named Marcus Vane. A beat of silence that contained something Ethan recognized, the weight of a name registering. Vane, Ray said slowly. The logistics guy. The same. Ethan. The voice was careful now, the unhurried quality giving way to something more considered. Vane doesn't do keynote disruptions. He does. He does the kind of thing that doesn't make the news. I know. So if he's running this in a convention center with 1,100 people in a press pool, he's desperate. The evidence against his operation has reached a point where removing the evidence is no longer viable. He's removing the witness. Ethan watched the street beyond the parking structure, which means he'll take risks he wouldn't normally take. And that makes him more dangerous, not less. Ray was quiet for a moment. Yeah, okay. A pause. What are you paying? Nothing yet. I'll figure it out. I'm not doing this for money. I'm doing this because you asked, and because Vane is the kind of person the world has a measurable quality of life improvement without. Another pause. Also because you've been mopping floors for 3 years, and it'd be nice to see you do something useful. I do useful things. Name one. I cleaned the men's room on the Meridian Grand's mezzanine level 600 times. I said useful. I have a 7-year-old who would argue otherwise. The sound on the other end was the specific sound of Ray Cutter trying not to laugh. How's Lily? Safe in Vermont, named a chicken the problem. Smart kid. A pause. Send me the venue layout when you have it. I'll be in Boston by Friday. The call ended. Ethan stood in the cold for a moment longer, listening to the particular quiet of a parking structure at night, concrete and distant traffic, and the smell of oil in October. He went back inside. What? The next 6 days had a shape to them that Ethan recognized from other periods of his life, the specific texture of preparation time, when the work of what was coming occupied every useful hour, and the waiting occupied everything else. It was the waiting that was hardest. Not because he couldn't manage it, but because managing it required a continuous, deliberate choice to stay present and not let his mind run too far ahead into the room he hadn't been in yet. Clara, true to form, had opinions about housing Victoria Sterling in her guest room for a week, and then said yes. She had a brief, pointed conversation with Victoria on the second evening that Ethan was not present for, and came away from it with something in her expression he couldn't entirely read. Not quite respect, because Clara already gave that carefully and conditionally, but something adjacent to it. Recognition, maybe. Victoria worked from Clara's kitchen table during the days. She had Dara, her engineer, the woman who'd found the anomaly, send encrypted files through a secure relay that Adrian had established, and she spent hours going through the documentation, checking, finding gaps, strengthening the chain of evidence. She did this with the focused, relentless attention of someone who had been building toward a deadline for a year and a half and was finally within reach of it. She drank too much coffee and slept too little and pushed back when Clara suggested she eat something other than toast. And Clara said something sharp back to her, and they had the kind of argument that people have when they're both tired and both right, and the conversation is really about something neither of them is saying directly. Ethan stayed out of it. He drove to New York on Thursday with Ray. They spent 11 hours at the Harrington Convention Center across 2 days, walking the venue in the guise of advanced staff. Ray had a contact at the Summit's production company, a completely genuine contact from legitimate security work, who got them access without raising questions. They went through every corridor, every service entrance, every utility room, every sublevel access point. The loading dock on the west side was exactly as problematic as the floor plan had suggested. The sublevel corridor connected the loading area to 4 separate stage access points, and the lighting in that corridor was institutional and inadequate, and the event security's posted rotation left a consistent 11-minute gap between checks on the sublevel west access. 11 minutes was more than enough. Ray looked at the gap and said, "That's where I'll be." "The stage left access is where they'll bring her off," Ethan said. "If anything happens during the keynote, she comes to me at stage left, and we go through the sublevel to the north service exit. Not the loading dock. North exit goes directly to the street, 40 yards to a parked vehicle." "Which vehicle?" "I'll have something there by morning of." Ray looked at him sideways. "You've been mopping floors for 3 years. I haven't forgotten anything." Clearly, Ray looked at the corridor one more time. "What about Vane himself? If he's in the building, we need him alive and talking." Ethan said it with a flatness that was not casual. "Elena Reyes has been building a case. Marcus Vane in a room answering questions is worth more than Marcus Vane not in any room at all. And if he doesn't see it that way, then we have a different problem." He paused. "One thing at a time." They drove back to Boston on Friday night. Ray stayed at a hotel near the airport, and Ethan drove to Clara's in the late evening and came in through the back and found Victoria at the kitchen table with papers spread in front of her and the overhead light on, and a cup of tea gone cold at her elbow. She looked up when he came in. "How was the venue?" she said. "Manageable." He sat down across from her. "How are you?" She looked faintly surprised by the question, which told him it wasn't one she got often enough. "I'm holding together." "That's not the same thing as okay." "No." She looked at the papers. "I keep thinking about Dara. She found this, and now she's been carrying the risk of it for 18 months, and she has a daughter who's 4, and I brought her into something she didn't sign up for." "She signed up for a thorough audit," Ethan said. "She found what she found because she's good at her work, That's not something you did to her. I didn't protect her fast enough when it became obvious. You made decisions under pressure with incomplete information. Some of them were right and some of them weren't, and that's what decisions under pressure look like. He said it plainly, without softening it. Dara is okay. Her daughter is okay. Carrying the guilt of every imperfect decision you've made in the last 18 months isn't going to make the summit go better. Victoria looked at him for a moment. You're direct. Is that a problem? No. Something shifted in her expression. No, it's one of the more useful things about you. One of, he said. Don't get smug about it. He almost smiled. How's the evidence chain? Complete as of this afternoon. Elena has a physical copy held through a federal courier service under seal. Adrienne has the congressional record. I have the primary documentation in 2 distributed physical locations. She sat back. If something happens to me at that summit, nothing's going to happen to you at the summit. But if it does, the evidence survives. It's built to survive without me. She said it with the particular steadiness of someone who had made a peace with a scenario they intended to avoid. I need you to know that, because you're going to be in that room making decisions, and I don't want you making them based on the idea that losing me loses the case. He was very still for a moment. Noted, he said. You don't like hearing it. I don't like the premise. He stood up and took her cold tea and put the kettle on without asking. But I understand why you said it. She watched him at the stove. Do you ever think about what comes after this? Sometimes. And? He was quiet, looking at the kettle. I think about Lily going back to school. I think about whether the Meridian Grand has held my position open or filled it. He paused. I think about the fact that I've spent a week doing the thing I told myself I was finished with, and I don't feel the way I expected to feel about it. How do you feel? He turned around. Like I've been walking around with one hand behind my back for 3 years. She looked at him for a long moment. The kitchen was warm and the kettle was beginning its low sound, and the October dark was against the windows. That's either a good thing or a frightening thing, she said. Probably both, he said, like most things. The kettle came up and he poured and brought the mug to her, and she wrapped both hands around it and looked at him from across the table with an expression that had none of the careful composition of the woman at the gala or the controlled steadiness of the service corridor. It was something more unguarded than that, something that had worn through its own surface enough to show what was underneath. 3 more days, she said. 3 more days, he agreed. Outside, Boston was cold and quiet. Down the hall, the guest room waited. In Vermont, a 7-year-old was probably arguing about whether 4 cookies constituted a reasonable number when you were exactly 7 years old, and a chicken named The Problem was presumably doing whatever it did, and somewhere in the city, a man named Marcus Vane was making preparations of his own. Ethan sat back down at the table across from Victoria Sterling and picked up the venue diagram and turned it to the light, and they worked through the evening together with the sound of the radiator knocking in the corner and the tea going warm between her hands. They drove to New York the morning of the summit's second day in 2 separate vehicles, which had been Ethan's call and which nobody argued with. Ray took the lead car with the equipment. Nothing that would flag a routine stop, everything legal, but gear selected by a man who had spent years thinking about what you needed when a situation moved faster than planning. Ethan drove the second car with Victoria in the passenger seat and Adrienne in the back, and they left Boston at 5:45 in the morning while the city was still dark and the highway was mostly trucks. Victoria slept for the first hour, not deeply. Her head didn't drop, her breathing didn't change the way it did in genuine sleep. But she went somewhere interior, eyes closed, hands folded in her lap, that conserving energy stillness of someone who had learned to rest in the spaces between things, because the things themselves didn't leave much room. Ethan drove and didn't talk and watched the highway the way he watched everything, with the even, distributed attention that never fully settled on any one point. Adrienne worked in the back seat by the light of a small reading lamp, going through the physical documentation one more time, not because anything had changed, but because she was the kind of person who needed the weight of the paper in her hands to feel certain. She told Ethan that the night before, unprompted, sitting at Clara's kitchen table after Victoria had gone to bed. I know it's all there. I've checked it 11 times. I just need to check it one more time in the morning, and then I'll be fine. He told her that was a reasonable way to be. She'd looked at him like she'd expected an argument and wasn't sure what to do with the absence of one. Elena Reyes was already in New York. She'd been there since the previous afternoon, establishing the formal documentation chain through a field office contact she trusted, preparing the sealed federal record that would receive Victoria's complete evidence package the moment the keynote ended. She texted Ethan at 6:10. In position, everything set on my end. Status? He texted back, 4 hours out, on schedule. She sent a thumbs up and nothing else, which was the right amount. Victoria stirred at the Connecticut border and looked at the highway, and then at the coffee in the cup holder that Ethan had picked up at a drive-thru outside Boston. Is that for me? She said. Yes. She took it and drank and looked at the road. Did you sleep? Some. How much is some? Enough. She gave him a sideways look that communicated she knew that wasn't true and had decided to let it go. Fine. We'll be at the venue by 10. Your slot is 11. Have you heard from Ray? He's already there. He went in last night. Ethan kept his eyes forward. He's been in the sub-level corridor since 6 this morning. If there's anyone already positioned down there, he'll know before we arrive. Victoria wrapped both hands around the coffee and looked out the window at the Connecticut landscape going past. The industrial stretches giving way to bare autumn trees, the occasional exit sign for towns he'd never been to. I keep thinking about the moment the lights went out at the Meridian Grand, she said. The way the room went from normal to wrong so fast. 400 people and it happened in under a second. Are you telling me you're afraid? I'm telling you I remember what it felt like. She paused. I need to know I can stand at that podium without that feeling taking over. He thought about how to answer that honestly. You'll feel it. There's no version of today where you don't feel it. The question is whether you let it make decisions for you. And if it tries? You already know the answer to that. You've been making decisions under that feeling for 18 months. He glanced at her briefly. You'll be fine. Not comfortable. Fine. In the back seat, Adrienne made a quiet sound that might have been agreement or might have been her finding a page she'd been looking for. Either way, she didn't look up. Victoria drank her coffee and didn't say anything else for a while, and the highway carried them south toward a city where something was waiting. The Harrington Convention Center sat between two glass office towers in Midtown and had the particular anonymous grandeur of a building designed to accommodate events without having a personality of its own. The main entrance faced east. The loading dock was west. The sublevel corridor ran between them like a spine, and it was there, in the fluorescent-lit utility passage that smelled of concrete dust and whatever the catering company had brought in that morning, that Ethan did a final walkthrough with Ray at 9:47, while Victoria was in the green room upstairs being briefed by the summit's program director. Ray had the look he always had in the hour before something, completely still in a way that wasn't passive. The specific stillness of someone whose engine was running at full capacity and making no noise about it. He'd aged since Ethan had last worked with him in any operational sense, which was years ago now. Lines around his eyes, some gray coming in at his temples. But he moved through the corridor with exactly the economy Ethan remembered. Nothing wasted, nothing performed. Two of them came through the loading dock at 8:50, Ray said, walking without looking at Ethan, eyes on the corridor ahead. They were carrying catering IDs. The IDs were good enough that the venue's own security passed them through. But not good enough for you. The taller one had his lanyard twisted, so the photo was against his chest. That's not catering staff nerves. That's deliberate. You flip it so it looks present at a glance but can't be read. He stopped at the junction where the corridor split toward the sub-level access points. I watched them for 20 minutes. They separated here. One went north access, one went south. They didn't speak to each other after they split. Pre-assigned positions. Yeah, I've got eyes on both of them. I have a contact inside event security who owes me something, and she's positioned to watch the north without making it obvious. He looked at Ethan. South is the problem. The regular event security rotation is exactly as gapped as we found. 11 minutes. I'll cover south. You'll be on stage left for Victoria's exit. Stage left is 40 seconds from south access if I move when I need to move. He looked at the corridor. The keynote is 50 minutes scheduled. The first 30 are low risk. They don't move until they've confirmed she's committed to the full address and the press is fully engaged. They'll wait for a moment that creates maximum disruption. The blackout again. That's the play that worked once, but they know we know about it. Ethan looked up at the lighting panel on the sub-level corridor ceiling. They'll use it as a feint, hit the lights to create movement, then come from a direction we've shifted away from. Ray was quiet for a moment. So we don't shift. We don't shift. Ray looked at him with the specific expression he'd had across a decade and a half of knowing each other. The expression that meant, I trust you, and I think you might be wrong, and I'm going in anyway. Okay, he said. You want me to stay on the loading dock approach and let the north access go to your event security contact? Yes. But tell your contact. If the north operative moves before the 30-minute mark, that's early and something has changed. She calls you immediately. Got it. Ray looked at his watch. Hour and 5 minutes. They walked back through the corridor toward the stage-level access. The corridor was not quiet. There was the distant, layered sound of 1,100 people filling the main hall, the particular low-grade roar of a large crowd settling, the PA system running a sound check on something instrumental. The summit was real and populated and full of the ordinary momentum of a large professional event proceeding normally. And somewhere inside that normalcy, two men with good fake credentials were standing at pre-assigned positions, waiting for an instruction that would come through an earpiece from a man who was, somewhere in this building or close to it, watching. At the stage-left access door, Ray stopped. He put a hand briefly on Ethan's shoulder, not a gesture of reassurance, just contact, the physical acknowledgement of two people who understood what they were walking into. Don't get shot, Ray said. Working on it, Ethan said. Ray went back down the corridor. Ethan went through the stage-left door. The green room was a small, overlit space behind the stage with catering that nobody was touching and a monitor showing the main hall feed. Victoria was standing in front of it when Ethan came in, watching the hall fill. She'd changed into a charcoal blazer, and she'd done something with her hair that was different from the week at Clara's, pulled back and clean, the version of herself she presented to rooms full of people who needed to take her seriously. She looked at him when he came in. Ray's in position, he said. 2 confirmed operatives in the sub-level. We know where they are. 2 confirmed, she said. What's the unconfirmed number? Unknown. Working assumption is 4 total, based on the Meridian Grand Formation. Is that number manageable? He considered being less direct and decided against it. It's manageable if nothing goes wrong that we haven't planned for. And if something does? Then we adapt. He looked at the monitor. The hall was nearly full. You ready? She turned from the monitor and looked at him fully. There was no tremor in her expression, no visible fear. There was something better than the absence of fear, which was the presence of decision. She had made her choice somewhere in the 18 months before this room and was simply living inside it now. When I was 24, she said, I built the first version of what became Arlen Systems in a 2-bedroom apartment with a second-hand server rack and a business partner who left after 8 months because he didn't think it would work. She said it without nostalgia, just as fact. I have been in rooms full of people who didn't think it would work for the last 6 years. I know how to stand at a podium. I know you do. I'm not telling you for reassurance. I'm telling you because in about 50 minutes, I'm going to walk out of that room through whatever comes, and I need you to know that the only direction I intend to move is forward. He held her gaze. Understood. A knock at the green room door. The program coordinator, a young man who had the harried energy of someone managing 11 things simultaneously. Ms. Sterling, we're ready for you in 5. She straightened her blazer. Looked at the monitor one more time, then at Ethan. Stage left, he said. If anything moves, you come to me on stage left and you don't stop. Stage left, she said. She walked to the door and through it, and Ethan moved to his position. The first 4 minutes of Victoria Sterling's keynote were the kind of professional performance that made rooms go quiet in spite of themselves. She had notes on the podium that she didn't look at. She spoke without filler and without the particular performative gravitas that people reached for when they were conscious of speaking to a crowd. She spoke the way she did in Clara's kitchen at 6 in the morning, directly, with the precision of someone who had thought carefully about what they were going to say and had nothing left to prove about whether they were capable of saying it. Ethan heard it through the stage-left monitor. He wasn't watching the room, he was watching the stage-left access door and the angle to the sub-level corridor entrance and the position of the 2 event security staff whose rotation he'd memorized, watching whether anything moved that wasn't supposed to move. At 4 minutes and approximately 30 seconds, Every light in the Harrington Convention Center went out. Not a flicker. Total. The crowd sound shifted immediately. The collective sharp intake, the beginning of confusion, the early edge of something that wasn't yet panic but was moving toward it. Ethan was already moving, not toward the stage, toward the sublevel corridor access, because the blackout was the feint. He'd said it to Ray 40 minutes ago, and he believed it, and his body was already running the logic before his mind finished stating it. If they hit the lights to make him go for Victoria, the real approach was coming from the direction he'd just vacated. He went through the sub-level access door. The corridor was on emergency lighting, the same inadequate fluorescent backup he'd seen during the walkthrough, casting everything in a flat greenish wash. He went left, toward South Access, and heard the movement before he saw it, the specific sound of someone who was moving fast and trying not to. The operative came through the South Access at a controlled run, already oriented toward the stage entrance, and Ethan was in the corridor between them. The man pulled up hard. They were 10 feet apart in a concrete corridor with emergency lighting and the distant muffled sound of the crowd above and somewhere further in the sublevel, the sound of something else happening that Ethan identified as Ray. The operative was young, younger than Ethan had expected, mid-20s, with the build and posture of someone who'd come out of genuine military training rather than private security theater. He had a weapon in his right hand, semi-automatic, which he'd pulled when he saw Ethan and which he had not yet raised because he was doing the same calculation Ethan was doing. Who are you? How dangerous are you? And what happens in the next 2 seconds? Put it down, Ethan said. Out of the way, the man said. His voice was controlled but thin. This isn't about you. I know what it's about. Ethan didn't move. And I'm telling you it's done. There are federal law enforcement officers in this building. The documentation you're trying to suppress has already been filed with a federal office. Whatever your principal told you about this operation, whatever outcome he sold you on, it's already passed. He kept his voice level and his body completely still. The only version of tonight that goes well for you is putting it down. The man's jaw worked. His eyes went briefly to the left, not looking at something, looking for an exit that wasn't there. He said she was... The man started and then stopped. What did he say about her? That she had... There were people who would die because of what she was about to publish. People in field positions whose covers she was about to blow. The man's grip on the weapon shifted slightly. He said she knew and didn't care. Ethan looked at him steadily. Marcus Vane told you that. The man's face tightened. She's a CEO who found a back door in a federal network that's being used to steal intelligence and sell it, Ethan said. The people whose covers are blown because someone inside that structure already sold them. That's what she found. That's what she's up there right now telling 1,100 people and a live press feed. He paused. You were the cleanup, not the mission. You understand that? The weapon came down. Not dramatically. Just a slow, tired lowering, the movement of someone whose conviction had just lost structural integrity. Ethan crossed the distance in 3 steps and took it from him with the practiced ease of someone for whom disarmament was muscle memory, and the man led him, which was the most important thing. Hands behind your head, Ethan said. Sit down against the wall. The man sat. Ethan zip-tied his wrist to a pipe bracket on the wall. He'd put zip ties in his jacket pocket 2 days ago, another reflex he hadn't had to think about, and pulled out his phone and called Elena's number. She picked up before the first ring finished. Talk. Sublevel South Corridor. I have one secured. Ray has another somewhere. I can hear it went physical on the north end. I'm coming down. Are you clear? Clear on my end. Main hall? Victoria is still at the podium. The emergency lighting kicked in, and she kept talking. A brief pause that contained something close to admiration. She kept talking, Ethan. He closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. 2 more unaccounted for, he said. I have one at the main hall entrance. My agents pulled him when the lights went out. He had a weapon concealed in a camera bag. That's 3. There's a 4th. I know, I'm looking. He ended the call and looked at the man sitting against the wall with his hands zip-tied to a pipe. Vane, Ethan said. Where is he? The man looked at the floor. I'm not asking for his sake. I'm asking because if Vane gets out of this building, none of what you just agreed to means anything. Every version of this that ends with you having any future at all requires him in a room answering questions. He crouched to the man's eye level. Where is he? A long pause. the sound of something above, the crowd, and through it, faintly, the cadence of Victoria's voice still going. "Control booth," the man said. "Level 2, northwest corner." He was going to watch the approach confirm, and then he stopped. He had an exit through the northwest stairwell. Ethan stood up. He went. The northwest stairwell was accessed through a door off the second-level mezzanine, and Ethan took the stairs 2 at a time and came out on the second level, moving at a run that he pulled back at the last second to a fast walk because running in a building full of civilians in an emergency situation attracted exactly the wrong attention. The control booth was visible at the far end of the mezzanine, a glassed-in room with the event's technical equipment, normally occupied by the AV team, currently dark because the power was out. Through the glass, in the emergency lighting, he could see a shape moving. The northwest stairwell door was 15 feet past the control booth. Ethan went through the control booth door. Marcus Vane was 54 years old and had the build of someone who had kept himself in functional shape without vanity, and he was standing at the window of the control booth looking down at the main hall below, with the particular stillness of a man who is processing information he didn't want to receive. He turned when Ethan came through the door, and for a moment they looked at each other in the greenish emergency light. Vane's face went through something complex. Recognition, calculation, and then a thing that wasn't quite surprise but was close. The look of a man confronting the specific complication he thought was safely in his past. "Cole," he said. "Vane. You're working hotel maintenance." "Not anymore, apparently." Vane's eyes moved to the door behind Ethan, to the stairwell door beyond, doing the same math Ethan had done 100 times in the last 10 days. He didn't reach for anything. Not a weapon, nothing, which meant he'd already done the math and arrived at a different answer than his operatives had. "The keynote is still going," Vane said. "Yes." "Which means the press has it live." "They do." Vane looked at the hall below. Victoria's voice was audible even through the control booth glass, clear, steady, continuing through the dark, the way it had continued through the dark at the Meridian Grand, which was apparently just who she was. "3 of my people," Vane said. It wasn't a question. 4. Something moved through his expression. All of them. All of them. Ethan stayed near the door. "You should sit down, Marcus." "Don't manage me." "I'm not managing you. I'm telling you practically. Sit down, because this conversation is going to take a few minutes, and there's nowhere for you to go, and standing in an alert posture for the whole thing is unnecessary." Vane looked at him for a moment. Then he moved to the AV console and sat on the edge of it, not quite relaxed but not performing threat. He was a man calculating options and finding none, and doing that calculation without the luxury of additional time. "You left," Vane said, 7 years ago. "I assumed you were building something, some kind of... I assumed you had a plan." He looked at Ethan with something that was complicated and not clean. "I found out about the child 2 years after you disappeared. I left it alone." "I know." Ethan had known, or had chosen to believe it, because the alternative was a 7-year anxiety that served nothing. "I'm not here about that." "Then what do you want?" "I want you to talk." He said it directly, without theater. "I want 11 hours of names, transactions, server locations, agency contacts, financial structures, payment chains, everything that connects Sentinel Arc to the network above it. Because we both know Hale didn't build this alone, and we both know the evidence Victoria Sterling has, as complete as it is, only goes so far without the layer you're sitting on." Vane was very still. "You know I can't..." "The people above you," Ethan said, "just watched 4 operatives get pulled in a convention center during a live-streamed keynote address. They are, right now, deciding whether Marcus Vane in custody is a liability or an asset. You know how that calculation ends better than I do." He held Vane's gaze. "What I'm offering you is a different calculation. Federal law enforcement, formal immunity negotiation, your testimony in exchange for a structure that protects you from the people who are currently deciding your value." Vane looked at the hall below, at the window where the muffled sounds of the summit continued, the crowd, the PA, the voice that hadn't stopped. "She's still talking," he said. "Yes." "She doesn't know what she walked into, the full scope of it." "She's about to." Ethan paused. "Because you're going to tell her, all of it, on the record." A long silence. The emergency lighting hummed. Below them, 1,100 people were watching a woman in a charcoal blazer do something that most people in her position would have stopped doing months ago. If I talk, Vane said slowly, there are people I name who will be arrested. Yes. Ethan kept his voice level. That's how this ends. It's not that simple. It never is. We're doing it anyway. Another silence. Vane looked at his hands. They were the hands of a man who had spent 30 years being in rooms where things were decided and had always, until this moment, been on the side of the decision. The adjustment was visible, not dramatic, not broken, just the slow, effortful repositioning of a man who had run out of the thing that kept him standing where he'd been standing. I need a guarantee, he said. I can get you Elena Reyes in this room in 15 minutes. She has the authority to begin a formal immunity negotiation. Reyes. Something crossed his face. She was pulled off her case in March. She's been building a parallel record since April, on her own time. Ethan watched him. She's thorough, Marcus. Like everyone else who's been working this problem. It turns out thorough people are hard to stop completely. Vane was quiet for a long moment. The sounds from the hall changed below them. The crowd, which had been the ambient noise of people managing disruption, shifted into something different, louder. The specific sound of applause beginning, building, spreading through a large room with the momentum of something genuine and not polite. Vane looked down through the window. Victoria Sterling was still at the podium. The emergency lighting had come back up to something workable, not full, but enough. And she was looking out at the hall with the expression of someone who had said what they came to say and was still standing. She finished it, Vane said quietly. Yes. With the lights out. She kept talking, Ethan said. That's what she does. Vane watched the hall below for a moment. Something in his posture changed in a way that was hard to name. Not defeat exactly, not relief exactly, but the particular release of a man who has been holding something at maximum tension for a very long time and has finally been given a reason to set it down. Get me Reyes, he said. Ethan pulled out his phone. Elena arrived in 9 minutes, not 15. She came through the control booth door with a federal credential in her hand, and 2 agents behind her and the focused, forward-leaning presence of someone who had been preparing for exactly this conversation since April and was not going to waste a syllable of it. She looked at Vane. She looked at Ethan. You're not hurt? She said to Ethan. I'm fine. She looked at his left side. He'd taken a hit from the South Corridor operative during the disarmament, not the weapon, an elbow, and apparently it showed in the way he was holding himself. You're not fine, she said. It's not significant. I'll be the judge of that after this is done. She turned to Vane with the full weight of her professional attention. Mr. Vane, my name is Elena Reyes. I'm a supervisory special agent, and I have the authority to begin a formal immunity agreement in exchange for full cooperation. Before we start, I want you to understand what full cooperation means in this context. Vane looked at her. Tell me. It means everything. Not the parts you've decided are safe to share. Not the version that protects the relationships you've decided are still worth protecting. Everything. Names, transactions, infrastructure, communications, the full operational history from inception. Her voice was not unkind and not soft. In exchange, I will advocate for the most favorable agreement available under the circumstances. I can't promise you a specific outcome. I can promise you that without this conversation, your outcome is determined entirely by people who have already demonstrated tonight what they do with liabilities. Vane was quiet for a moment. All right, he said. All right meaning you'll cooperate fully? All right meaning start recording. Elena reached into her jacket and produced a small digital recorder, turned it on, set it on the AV console between them. She stated the date and time and her own credentials for the record, then looked at Marcus Vane with the patient, precise attention of someone settling in for a very long conversation. Let's start at the beginning, she said. When did Gordon Hale first approach you? Below them, through the control booth window, the applause in the main hall was still going. Ethan moved to the side of the room and lowered himself carefully to a sitting position against the wall. The left side was telling him clearly now that the elbow had done something worth acknowledging, and listened to Marcus Vane begin to talk. He talked for 11 hours. Not in the control booth. They moved to a secure federal location within the hour, Vane in custody but cooperating, The formal immunity negotiation beginning immediately with a federal attorney Adrian had on call. But the shape of it started in that room, in the flat emergency lighting of the Harrington Convention Center control booth, with the sounds of a dispersing summit crowd below, and an agent's recorder running, and a man who had spent 30 years in the spaces between things finally choosing to stand somewhere visible. Ethan sat against the wall until Ray appeared in the doorway, 20 minutes after Elena had taken Vane out. Ray looked at him, at the way he was sitting, at the left side. "How bad?" Ray said. "Bruised, maybe cracked." Ethan assessed it with the dispassionate inventory of someone who had cataloged this category of information many times. "Not broken." "You sure?" "I'm sure it hurts like it's cracked and not like it's broken. There's a difference." Ray came in and sat down on the AV console with his arms folded. He had a cut above his right eye that had been dealt with in a torn jacket pocket, and the look of someone who'd been in a physical altercation and was fine and didn't need to make much of it. "North operative is in federal custody," Ray said. "Your event security contact held the position the whole time. She's good, Ethan." "I know. Tell her I said so." "Already did." Ray looked out through the control booth window at the empty hall below. The crowd gone now, the setup crew beginning to move through it, pulling cable, stacking chairs. "She kept talking," Ray said. "I heard. Through the whole blackout, 1,100 people in the dark, and she just kept talking." "Yeah." Ray was quiet for a moment. "You knew she would." Ethan looked at the empty hall. "I didn't know. I believed it." "What's the difference?" "Knowing is about information. Believing is about the person." He shifted slightly, testing the left side, and decided not to do that again immediately. She'd been carrying this for 18 months. She wasn't going to stop 4 minutes into the finish line. Ray made a sound that was neither agreement nor disagreement, but somewhere between them. He looked at the recorder on the console. Elena had taken it, but the spot where it had sat was still somehow present in the room, the ghost of the thing that had started there. "Vane will give them everything?" Ray asked. He started giving it before Elena turned the recorder on. Ethan looked at his hands. "He's scared. He's been scared for a while, I think." People who run operations like this, they know better than anyone what happens to the people who don't get out ahead of it. And Hale? Hale's lawyers are expensive and they'll try, but Vane has 11 hours of records that Hale doesn't know exist. That's not survivable. He paused. "Not legally." Ray nodded slowly. His phone buzzed. He looked at it, then at Ethan. "Victoria is asking where you are." Ethan looked up. "She's in the green room with Adrian. They want to know." Ray looked at the screen. "She says, and I'm reading this exactly, is he all right, or is he doing the thing where he says he's fine and isn't?" Something shifted in Ethan's chest in a way that was difficult to categorize. "Tell her I'm coming," he said. He got himself up from the floor with the careful movement of a man whose left side had filed a formal complaint and was awaiting response, and Ray watched him without comment, which was the correct response. He walked out of the control booth and down the mezzanine toward the green room, moving through the back-of-house spaces of the Harrington Convention Center, while the front of house was being broken down and the federal machinery was beginning its slow, enormous turn toward everything Marcus Vane had just unlocked. He was thinking about Lily. He was thinking about a chicken named The Problem and a 7-year-old who ate 4 cookies and considered it a reasonable number. He was thinking about a 2-bedroom apartment on Tremont Street and a stuffed rabbit named Gerald, and the specific quality of quiet in a house where a child is asleep and everything is, temporarily, all right. He pushed open the green room door. Victoria was standing near the monitor, still in the charcoal blazer, and she looked at him when he came in with the direct, complete attention she gave to everything, and her eyes went immediately to the left side and stayed there for a moment. "You're hurt," she said. "Bruised." He came in and let the door close behind him. "You kept talking." "Of course I kept talking." "Through the blackout. 1,100 people in the dark." "The press feed was still live. I checked." She held his gaze with the particular expression she'd worn since the service corridor, the one that was working something out, that had been working something out across 10 days, and a life he'd tried to keep separated from all of this. "Vane?" "In federal custody, cooperating. It started an hour ago." He looked at her. "It's done, Victoria." She absorbed that. The word done had a specific weight in the room. Not light, not triumphant, just present. The weight of a thing that had been carried for a very long time arriving at the place it was going. Adrienne, who had been sitting in the corner of the green room with her documentation folder, stood up and said something about needing to make a call and slipped out with the quiet tact of someone who understood the room. The door closed. Victoria looked at Ethan. 18 months, she said. I know. And it took a janitor in a ballroom to... She stopped. The corner of her mouth moved. It took you. It took a lot of people. He meant it. Adrienne, Elena, Ray, Dara. He paused. You, for 18 months before any of us were in the picture. Don't be modest. I'm not being modest. I'm being accurate. He looked at her steadily. You built the thing that made tonight possible. We just made sure you got to finish it. She was quiet for a moment. There was something different about her face now. Not quite the composure finally coming down, because Victoria Sterling didn't operate that way, but something relaxing beneath it, some fundamental tension releasing that had been so constant for so long it had become invisible. Your side, she said. Have you had it looked at? Not yet. You should. I will. Tonight. Probably tomorrow. She looked at him with an expression that combined professional exasperation with something considerably warmer and said nothing, which was the correct response to that particular answer from that particular person. Outside the green room, the Harrington Convention Center was doing what large venues did after large events, the purposeful, unglamorous work of returning to neutral. Cable coiled, chairs stacked, the temporary infrastructure of a thing that had mattered being folded back into storage until it was needed to matter again. And somewhere in a federal facility in Midtown Manhattan, a man named Marcus Vane was talking into a recorder, giving up the architecture of 30 years, and the machinery that could do something with it was finally, for the first time, properly supplied. Marcus Vane talked for 11 hours and 4 minutes, and when it was over, he looked like a man who had put down something so heavy for so long that the absence of it had left him genuinely unsure how to stand. Elena Reyes told Ethan this the following morning, over coffee in a federal building conference room that smelled of recycled air and old carpet. She looked tired in the way that people look tired after a night spent in rooms where the stakes were real. Not the theatrical exhaustion of someone performing effort, but the plain, quiet kind that settled into the eyes and stayed there. He gave us everything, she said. Not just Sentinel Arc. The full network, 12 years of it. Names, accounts, server infrastructure. The agency contacts who were on payroll, the foreign buyers, the domestic shell companies. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. Gordon Hale is going to need an army of lawyers, and it's not going to be enough. How many names? Ethan asked. Significant, senior level in 2 agencies, 3 sitting members of a federal advisory board, and 1 individual whose name I can't say in this room yet because the arrest warrant is still being prepared. She looked at him over the cup. The scale of it is, it's the kind of thing that's going to rewrite how people understand what was happening inside those systems for the last decade. And Vane's agreement? Formal immunity on the operational charges in exchange for complete cooperation and testimony. He'll face some consequences, financial penalties, restrictions. But he won't serve time if his testimony holds up. She paused. It will hold up. He was thorough, methodically, exhaustingly thorough, like a man who had been mentally preparing for this moment for years and had finally decided which side of the door to be on. Ethan thought about the control booth, the way Vane had watched Victoria at the podium through the glass below, and said she finished it with the specific tone of a man whose conviction had just run out of structural support. He's scared, Ethan said. He should be. The people he named are going to have resources and motivation to address his decision. Elena's voice was professionally flat. We have a protection arrangement in place. It's not my first time at this particular rodeo. Will it hold? The arrangement? Yes. I chose the people running it myself. She set the cup down. Your ribs. Cracked. 2 of them. He'd gone to a hospital the previous evening, at Victoria's insistence and with Ray driving, because neither of them had trusted him to go alone. The ER physician had taped him up and told him to avoid strenuous activity for 6 weeks, which had produced a response from Ray that Ethan chose not to repeat. I've had worse. I don't doubt it. Elena looked at him with the direct, assessing expression she'd had since the first meeting in Alston. What are you going to do now? He looked at the conference room wall. Institutional beige, a clock that was 2 minutes fast. "I'm going to get in my car and drive to Vermont," he said, "and bring my daughter home." Elena was quiet for a moment. "And after that?" "After that, I'm going to figure out the rest." She nodded, like that was the correct answer, even if it wasn't a complete one. The drive to Vermont took 3 hours and 40 minutes, which was 20 minutes longer than it should have taken, because he stopped outside Brattleboro at a gas station and sat in the parking lot for a while with the engine idling and did something he almost never allowed himself to do, which was to simply stop moving and feel the full weight of the last 11 days. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't fall apart. He sat in the car with his hands on the wheel and his cracked ribs making themselves known every time he breathed too deeply, and he let himself be, for a few minutes, just a person who had been through something significant and had come out the other side still intact. He thought about the ballroom. The moment before the lights went out, when he'd been standing 40 feet away from a man moving toward a woman who didn't know it was coming, and the choice he'd made about when to move had been the difference between the night going one way or another. He had made the right call. He also knew how close the right call was to the wrong one, and the distance between them was not comfortable to look at directly. He thought about the corridor in the Harrington. The young operative, mid-20s, military-trained, running a mission he'd been told was righteous. The kind of person who existed in every generation of every conflict because someone older and more practiced had gotten to him first and told him a convincing story. He hadn't needed to hurt that man. He was glad he hadn't needed to. He thought about Vane, sitting against the AV console in the flat emergency light, watching a woman he'd spent months trying to silence finish her speech in the dark. I thought about the difference between the things you did because you had to and the things you did because you chose to. He had chosen every part of this. The movement in the ballroom, Clara's brownstone, New York, the corridor, the control booth. Nobody had drafted him. He'd walked back into it with his eyes open and his daughter safely in Vermont and the full knowledge of what it cost when things went wrong. That was the thing he'd been avoiding looking at for 7 years. Not that he was capable of this work, but that he was willing to do it. There was a version of himself he'd constructed after the mission that had changed him. The quiet, invisible version. The man with the mop and the clean record and the 2-bedroom apartment. And that version was real. He'd lived inside it genuinely. It wasn't a performance. But it was also incomplete. You couldn't subtract something from yourself just by refusing to use it. It stayed there. The question was what you did with that. He started the car and pulled back onto the highway. Margaret Cole's farmhouse sat at the end of a gravel road in a part of Vermont that felt deliberately far from everything, surrounded by bare October maples, and a pasture that ran down to a tree line, and 6 chickens who were presumably out there somewhere doing whatever chickens did in cold weather. He pulled in at 2:15 in the afternoon and had the door open before the car fully stopped, which made his ribs register a formal complaint, and he was still working out the careful way to get out of the vehicle when the front door of the farmhouse banged open and Lily appeared at a dead sprint across the porch and down the steps. She was 7 years old and 48 pounds, and she hit him with the specific, joyful recklessness of a child who had not yet learned to moderate her physical enthusiasm for reunions. And he caught her and lifted her despite the ribs saying clearly and specifically that this was not on the list of recommended activities, because some things were more important than cracked ribs. She smelled like outside and something baked, and she had leaves in her hair from wherever she'd been, and she talked into his shoulder at a pace and volume that made it difficult to catch the individual words, but conveyed the overall message clearly, which was that she had missed him and Vermont had been acceptable, but he was better. "Easy," he said, "because the ribs." She pulled back and looked at his face with the forensic attention that children applied to adults they knew well. "You have a tired face," she announced. "I have a tired face," he agreed. "Did something happen at work?" "Something happened at work." "A big something or a medium something?" He thought about this seriously, because she was 7 and deserved a serious answer. "A big something that is finished now." She studied him for another moment, the gap in her front teeth very visible, because she was frowning with concentration, and then apparently decided that finished was the operative word, and moved on. "I named the brown chicken Margaret," she said, "and Aunt Margaret says she doesn't mind, but she does mind. I can tell." "Maybe name it something else." "I already told the chicken its name. You can't change a chicken's name once it knows it." Does the chicken know it? Lily considered this. It knows something. Margaret appeared on the porch with the expression she'd been wearing for most of her 53 years, which combined genuine warmth with the evaluative squint of a woman who did not miss much. She looked at him the way she always looked at him when he returned from something she hadn't been told about, comprehensively, looking for the specific thing she was going to have to be not quite worried about. She saw it. She was always going to see it. She'd seen things since they were children together that nobody else noticed. "Come inside," she said. "I made soup." "You made soup because you thought something happened." "I made soup because it's October and cold." She held the door open. "Bring your daughter." He carried Lily inside. His ribs voiced their continuing objection. He ignored them. That evening, after Lily was in bed in Margaret's guest room, she'd negotiated for 20 more minutes 3 separate times, and Margaret had caved to all 3, which was the inevitable outcome of their relationship. Ethan sat at the kitchen table with his sister and a cup of tea and told her most of it. Not all of it. The parts that were classified remained classified, which was a habit so deep by now it operated below conscious decision. But he told her enough. The gala. Victoria. Clara's brownstone. New York. The ribs. Margaret listened without interrupting, which was a skill she'd developed over years of being the person he told things to when he told them to anyone at all. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Are you done?" she said. "With the situation? Yes. It's in federal hands." "I don't mean the situation." She looked at him across the table. "Are you done with the version of yourself that pushed a mop for 3 years and pretended the rest of it wasn't there?" He looked at his tea. "I wasn't pretending," he said. "I know you weren't." Her voice was not unkind. "You genuinely tried to put it away. I watched you try. And you did it. You built a real life, Ethan. A good one. Lily is healthy and happy, and she knows the chickens' names, but you were also walking around with one hand behind your back." He looked at her. "Victoria Sterling said almost exactly that," he said. "Smart woman." "Yes." Margaret wrapped her hands around her own cup. "What happens now? With her? With the job situation? With all of it?" "She offered me a position, chief of security at Arlen Systems." He'd been carrying the offer since the day before. Victoria had made it in the green room at the Harrington, straightforwardly, without framing it as anything other than what it was. "Using what I know, legitimately, for something that isn't, for something I can look at directly." "And you said?" "I said I'd think about it." "Which means you've already decided." He almost smiled. "Probably." Margaret looked at him for a long moment with the expression of someone who had been watching this particular person for his entire life and had opinions about most of it. "She'd be good for you," she said. "This isn't about—" "I didn't say anything specific. I said she'd be good for you." She picked up her cup. "Someone who sees you clearly and doesn't need you to be smaller than you are. That's not nothing." He didn't answer that. "Lily likes her?" Margaret asked. "They haven't met." "But she will." "Probably," he said again. Margaret set her cup down. "Go to bed, Ethan. You have cracked ribs and a tired face, and your daughter is asleep 20 feet away, and she's going to be up at 6 asking to see the chickens." She stood up. "The rest of it will still be there in the morning." He went to bed. His ribs made the process of lying down a careful negotiation. He found the position that was least objectionable and stayed there, looking at the ceiling of Margaret's spare room, different from Clara's guest room, different from his room on Tremont Street, familiar in the specific way that a place you've slept in since childhood was familiar even when everything around it had changed. He slept. And in the morning, Lily was up at 6 asking to see the chickens. They drove back to Boston 3 days later. Lily sat in the back seat with Gerald on her lap and a drawing she'd made of the chickens in a folder she'd demanded from Margaret, because the drawing was, in her assessment, very good and needed protection during transport. She talked for the first hour about the chickens individually, with particular focus on the problem, who had apparently distinguished herself during the visit through a series of incidents that Lily described with the moral seriousness of someone filing a report. Ethan drove and listened, and the October afternoon came through the windows, and the highway moved under them, and he felt the specific quality of this particular ordinary thing, the drive, the child's voice, the familiar weight of returning, with more clarity than he usually let himself feel it. This was what he'd built. Not the apartment, not the job, not the careful, invisible life. This. The scent of her in the back seat. The drawing in the folder. The question she'd ask when they got home, which would be something about dinner or Gerald, or whether the leaves on Tremont Street were the same color as Vermont's. And he'd answer it, and that would be enough. He'd spent 7 years treating that enough as something fragile, something that had to be protected by making himself small and still and unnoticeable. As if his daughter's safety depended on his invisibility. As if the only way to keep her was to keep himself hidden. What the last 11 days had shown him. And he was still working out how to hold this. It wasn't a clean lesson. It was the kind of understanding that arrived sideways and took time to settle. Was that the opposite was true. Lily didn't need an invisible father. She needed a present one. A real one. One who showed up when things required showing up. Who used what he had instead of pretending he didn't have it. Who could look at himself in the mirror without the particular discomfort of a man performing a version of himself that wasn't quite complete. That wasn't licensed to go looking for trouble. He wasn't 26 anymore, and he knew enough about what violence actually cost to have no romance about it. But it also wasn't a reason to spend the rest of his life apologizing for what he was. "Dad," Lily said. "Yeah." "When we get home, can we have the noodles? The ones from the place on Hanover? The long ones." "Yeah, we can do that." She went back to looking out the window. He drove. 19 days after the summit, the federal indictments came down. Ethan heard about it through Elena, who called him at 7:45 in the morning while he was making Lily's lunch. A cheese sandwich, apple slices, the specific crackers that were the only kind Lily accepted as legitimate crackers, and delivered the information with the contained professional satisfaction of someone who had been working towards something for a very long time and was now watching it arrive. Gordon Hale was arrested at his home in Virginia. 2 senior officials from 2 separate federal agencies were taken into custody within the same 2-hour window. 11 additional individuals across the financial and political structure that Vane's testimony had illuminated were charged in a coordinated series of actions that had clearly been in preparation for several weeks. Sentinel Arc's offices were sealed. Its federal contracts were suspended pending a full investigation that would take, Elena estimated, between 18 months and 3 years to complete. The data network, the persistent access layer, the backdoor built into federal systems, the architecture that had been quietly stealing and selling for years, was identified, documented, and disabled by a team of federal cybersecurity specialists who had been briefed on Arlen Systems' original discovery and spent 11 days working through the implications. Dara, the engineer who had found the anomaly in the access logs 18 months ago, was named in the federal citation as a key technical contributor to the investigation. She called Victoria when the citation went public and cried, which she told Victoria afterward she was embarrassed about, and Victoria told her she'd cried in a government building bathroom the day after the summit and was prepared to call it even. The news coverage was significant and complicated and occasionally wrong in the specific ways that news coverage was wrong when the story was too large and technical for a news cycle to hold completely. There were photographs of the Harrington Convention Center and clips of Victoria's keynote. The live stream had captured the full 50 minutes, including the 14 minutes delivered in near darkness, and headlines that ranged from accurate to breathless to completely missing the point. None of the coverage mentioned a former Navy SEAL who had been working night maintenance at a Boston hotel. Ethan read a few of the articles at his kitchen table on a Tuesday morning after he'd walked Lily to school. She'd gone back the week before, her teacher apparently too experienced to make a fuss about the slightly unusual return schedule, and felt about the absence of his name the same way he'd felt about most of the decisions he'd made over the last decade, which was that it was correct and required no further examination. His phone buzzed. "Victoria, have you seen the coverage?" He typed back, "Some of it. The Times got most of it right. The Chronicle got the Sentinel Arc financial structure completely wrong. I'm resisting the urge to send them a correction." "Don't send them a correction. I know. I won't." A pause. Then, Elena called. "She says the immunity arrangement for Vane is holding. The protection detail is solid. Good." Another pause. Longer. "Have you thought more about the position?" He looked at the kitchen. The lunch dishes still in the rack from the morning. A drawing Lily had made of their apartment building, she'd been drawing buildings recently, with detailed and not particularly accurate windows, stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a lobster that he'd had for years without knowing how he'd acquired it. He typed, "Yes." And? He looked at the drawing for a moment, at the lobster magnet, at the kitchen that was his kitchen in the apartment that was his apartment in the city he'd chosen because nobody from his old life had a connection to it. "I'm in," he typed. "On my terms." The response came back in under 10 seconds. "I'd expect nothing else. What are your terms?" He smiled at the phone. "A real one, the kind that happened before you decided to have it. I'll tell you over coffee. Hanover Street. The place with the good espresso. Saturday at 10 if you're in Boston. I'm in Boston. Saturday at 10 then." He put the phone in his pocket and looked at the kitchen and thought about terms. The terms were simple, not complicated by pride or by the need to prove anything to anyone, including himself. Lily came first. That wasn't negotiable and never would be, and any arrangement that didn't build around that fact was not an arrangement worth making. He would not work operations. He would not put himself in the field on anything that required him to be unavailable to a 7-year-old at 3 in the morning. He would assess, advise, build systems, train people. The work of prevention rather than response. The application of everything he knew toward making sure the moment that required a man to sprint through a ballroom in the dark arrived as rarely as possible. He could do that work. He was good at it. He'd been good at it from the beginning, even when the thing he was protecting was a single 2-bedroom apartment and a child who named chickens and thought 4 cookies was a reasonable number. The difference now was that he wasn't pretending otherwise. Saturday morning was cold and clear, the kind of Boston October morning that came in at 40 degrees and smelled of dead leaves and harbor and the particular mineral cold of the season turning. Lily had a soccer game, the fall season's last, and Ray, who was still in Boston and not in any particular hurry to leave, had agreed to take her and report back. Ethan had watched them leave from the apartment window, Lily and cleats 3 sizes up from where she'd started the season. Ray walking beside her with his hands in his jacket pockets, the two of them discussing something serious based on their expressions, which probably meant she was explaining the problem chicken in detail. He walked to Hanover Street. The coffee place was small and had mismatched chairs and served espresso. That was genuinely good in the specific way that espresso in places that took it seriously was different from espresso in places that didn't. He arrived first, which he always did, and got a table near the window and ordered 2 coffees because he knew how she took hers from 11 days of mornings in Clara's kitchen. She came in at 2 minutes past 10, charcoal coat, her hair down, which was the version of her he'd seen at the kitchen table at 6 in the morning rather than the version at the podium. She looked like someone who had slept a full night's sleep for the first time in a year and a half and whose body was still slightly uncertain about how to manage the surplus. She looked at the coffee waiting for her and then at him. "You remembered," she said. "I made it in front of you every morning for a week." Some people don't notice. Some people aren't paying attention. He stood until she sat, another reflex, and she acknowledged it without comment. She sat across from him and wrapped both hands around the cup, the same way she always did, and looked at him with the direct, complete attention that had characterized every conversation they'd had since the service corridor. "Your ribs," she said. "Better." "Still cracked?" "Healing. They do that." She looked at him steadily. "You look different." "Than what?" "Than the man in the hotel corridor." She said it thoughtfully, not as a compliment or a judgment. "You looked contained in those days, like someone keeping something at a specific pressure." She tilted her head slightly. "You look less contained now." "Is that a professional observation?" "Personal." She said it without making anything of it, which was, he was learning, her way of saying the things that mattered, directly, without theatrical weight, trusting the words to carry themselves. "Tell me your terms," he told her. All of it, in the order he'd worked it out. Lily first, no field operations, prevention over response, the specific kind of work he was willing to do and the specific kind he was not. He said it plainly, without apology, because the terms were not requests for approval. They were the shape of what was possible. She listened without interrupting, which was consistent with everything he knew about how she operated. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The no field operations requirement," she said. "I want to understand what that means in practice. Because in a genuine security situation, my job is to have built systems good enough that I'm not the last line. He met her eyes. If I'm the last line, we've already failed at everything upstream. She thought about that. And if something goes wrong anyway, then I make a judgment call like any professional does when the plan meets reality. He paused. But I'm not building an arrangement around the assumption that it will. I'm building it around the assumption that we'll do the work right. She nodded slowly. That's a reasonable position. It's the only position I've got. The coffee shop was busy around them. Saturday morning, the specific kind of Boston weekend energy that pushed people outdoors into the cold and into small, warm rooms simultaneously. A couple at the next table was having a muted disagreement about something. A man near the counter was reading a physical newspaper, which Ethan still found faintly remarkable. Two children were being managed with varying success by their father, who was doing his best. He noticed these things in the order he'd always noticed them and felt no particular urgency about any of it. There's something I've been thinking about, Victoria said. She was looking at her coffee, not at him, which was unusual enough to note. Since the green room at the Harrington. What's that? She looked up. You told me the evidence surviving didn't depend on me surviving. I told you that so you could make operational decisions without the wrong variable weighted too heavily. I remember. It was the correct thing to say operationally. She held his gaze. It was also, for me personally, a thing I'd gotten very practiced at saying. The version of myself that exists independently of the outcome. The case survives, the truth enters the record, the work continues. She paused. I've been doing that for 18 months, practicing being a function rather than a person, because it was easier than sitting with the fact that I was frightened. I was very still. Were you frightened? He said. Constantly. She said it like it was a fact she'd recently decided to stop filing under something else. I was frightened in a specific, persistent, low-level way that I managed by staying busy and staying useful and not thinking too directly about the fact that there were people who had decided I should not exist. She wrapped her hands around the cup. It worked, operationally. It got me to the summit. It got me to the podium. A pause. I'm not sure I want to keep doing it that way. He looked at her. The particular quality of what she'd just said required a moment to sit before he responded to it, because she hadn't said it lightly, and he wasn't going to receive it lightly. What do you want to do instead? He said. She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, a siren went past on Hanover Street and faded. Figure that out, she said. I think I'd like to figure that out. She said it with the specific cadence of someone putting something down that they'd been carrying in a way that wasn't quite right, not giving it up, just repositioning it. I'm 30 years old. I've spent the last 6 years building a company and the last 18 months inside a crisis, and before that I was building toward the crisis without knowing it. She looked at the coffee. I don't actually know what I'm like when nothing is on fire. You're in the kitchen at 6 in the morning, he said, when you've had one coffee and you're working something out. She looked at him. That's when you're most yourself, he said. Not the podium version, not the green room version, the kitchen version. She was quiet for a moment. Something in her expression shifted in the way it had shifted in Clara's kitchen in the small hours. Not composure coming down, but something underneath it becoming visible. You paid attention, she said. I pay attention to most things. To me specifically. He didn't look away. Yes. The coffee shop moved around them with its ordinary Saturday noise. At the next table, the couple had resolved whatever it was. The man with the newspaper turned a page. I'm going to be difficult to work with, she said. I know. I mean genuinely, not in a performative way. I have specific ways of doing things, and I push back when I disagree, and I work too many hours, and I expect a lot from people. I spent 6 years in an environment where people were specifically selected for being difficult to work with, he said. It's not a deterrent. She studied him. And personally, she gestured between them, if this becomes something, you should know the same things apply. I'd expect them to. You're not concerned? You're a real person. Real people are complicated. He looked at her steadily. The alternative is people who aren't complicated. I've met them. I prefer complicated. Something that was almost a smile came into her expression. Not the practiced professional version, not the controlled under pressure version. The real one, the one he'd seen twice, Once when she'd almost laughed in the car about the chickens, and once in the kitchen in the small hours when she'd said figure that out about what came after. And it changed her face in a way that was uncalculated and therefore, to him, more convincing than anything she'd said at a podium. Saturday at 10 was a good idea, she said. I have them occasionally. The coffee is good too. I know the neighborhood. She looked at him across the table in the small, warm coffee shop on Hanover Street, and he looked back at her, and neither of them said anything for a moment that was long enough to be something without being too long to be comfortable. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it. Elena, Can I take this? Take it. She stepped outside and he watched her through the window. The charcoal coat, the hair down, the posture of someone who'd carried something impossible and put it down in the right place, standing on a Boston sidewalk in the cold October light, talking. He looked at his own phone. Ray had sent a message, a photograph. Lily on a soccer field in the aftermath of the game, mud on her knee, cleats, the gap in her front teeth very visible because she was grinning with the specific ferocity of someone who had done something she was proud of. Ray had written beneath it, 3-0. She scored twice and then told me the second goal was better than the first one, and she was correct. Ethan looked at the photograph for a moment. He thought about the things you built out of difficult material, the structures that didn't announce themselves, that stood without needing anyone to look at them and confirm they were standing. He thought about a 2-bedroom apartment on Tremont Street and a mop handle and a 7-year-old who took the geometry of things seriously and a set of ribs that were healing, incrementally, the way things healed when you let them. He thought about the fact that 7 years was a long time to hold your breath. He thought about what it felt like to let it out. Victoria came back through the door in a wash of cold air, her cheeks bright from the temperature, and sat back down and said, "She wants a meeting on Tuesday about the Sentinel Arc documentation transfer." And he said, "I can be there." And she said, "Good." And they drank their coffee in the ordinary way of two people who had found, through the specific machinery of a very bad situation, that they were each exactly the kind of difficult and real that the other one could manage. Not perfect, not a clean story, not the version where everything resolved into something uncomplicated and warm and without sharp edges. Just two people in a coffee shop on a Saturday morning with the rest of it, the work, the adjustment, the slow and unremarkable business of figuring out who you were when the emergency was over, still in front of them. That was the truth of it, and it was enough. Outside on Hanover Street, Boston went about its Saturday. The cold came in off the harbor with its mineral edge, and the leaves were down on most of the trees, and someone down the block was arguing with a parking meter, and a delivery driver was double-parked eating lunch in his cab, and two kids on scooters went past at a speed their parents would not have approved of. Ethan watched it through the window. He had a daughter who had scored 2 goals and believed the second was better than the first. He had cracked ribs that were healing. He had work that used what he was instead of asking him to subtract it. He had a woman across the table who was reading Elena's follow-up text with the focused intensity she gave to everything, and who would, he was fairly certain, still be giving him exactly that level of difficulty and realness in 5 years, if he did not waste the thing that was possible here. He wasn't going to waste it. He had spent 7 years learning how to protect a life. He was beginning, at 37, on a Saturday morning in October, to understand that protecting a life and living one were not the same activity. You could do the first and miss the second entirely. You could be so committed to keeping something safe that you forgot to let it be full. Lily had not let him make that mistake completely. She'd been too loud and too present and too specifically herself. Too insistent on the chickens having names, too committed to the reasonableness of 4 cookies, too interested in the gap in her own teeth and what she could whistle through it, to let him disappear entirely into the careful, quiet, armored version of fatherhood. She'd kept him human when he was trying to be invisible. He would have to find a way to tell her that someday, when she was old enough for it to land correctly. Not as a burden, children shouldn't carry the weight of being someone's reason, but as a truth. That she had been, without knowing it or trying to, the specific counterweight that kept him from losing himself completely to the habit of hiding. For now, she was 8 weeks from losing the second front tooth and deeply invested in the whistling question, and that was enough. Victoria set her phone down and looked at him. "Tuesday at 2, she said. "Elena's office." "I'll be there." She looked at him with the directness that was simply how she was. No performance, no curation, just the unmediated attention of a person who had decided, at some point, that managing how she came across was a less interesting project than simply being what she was. "I'm glad you were in that ballroom," she said. He thought about that, about the 40 feet, about the 11 minutes, about the mop handle and the man on the balls of his feet near the east corridor and the moment the lights went out and the choice that was already made before he'd consciously made it. "I'm glad I moved when I did," he said. "So am I." She paused. "I've been thinking about what you said in the corridor, that you'd been standing 40 feet away for 11 minutes, and it bothered you. It still does. It shouldn't. You moved at the right moment, earlier, and it goes differently. You read it correctly." "I know." "Then why does it still bother you?" He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the delivery driver finished his lunch and started the engine and pulled out into traffic with the particular unhurried ease of someone whose day was just another day. "Because there are always 11 minutes," he said finally, "before everything that happens. And you're standing there doing the math, watching it develop, knowing what it is, and the question is always whether you moved at the right moment or whether you're going to spend the rest of your life thinking about what you should have done differently." He looked at his coffee. "I've had a lot of those 11 minutes. Some of them I got right. Some of them I didn't." He paused. "The thing I'm still working out is that getting it right isn't the same as getting it cleanly. You make the right call and you still carry what it cost. That doesn't go away." Victoria was looking at him with the same expression he'd seen in Claire's kitchen in the small hours, the one that had nothing performed in it. "No," she said quietly. "It doesn't." She looked at her hands. "I made a lot of imperfect calls over 18 months. Some of them put people I care about at risk. I'll carry those too." She looked up. "I think that might be what it means to be serious about something. You do the best you can and you carry the weight of the times the best you could do still costs something, and you keep going anyway." He looked at her. That was it, he thought. That was the thing he'd been trying to work out since a parking lot outside Brattleboro with the engine idling, the thing that didn't resolve into a clean lesson because it wasn't a lesson, it was just the condition of being a person who tried to do something that mattered. You carried it and you kept going. "Ah," he said. "That's about right." She picked up her coffee. He picked up his. Outside on Hanover Street, the October morning continued its ordinary Saturday, cold and clear, and full of the unremarkable specific details of people living their lives. The man who had spent 7 years being invisible sat in a coffee shop in Boston with a woman who had spent 18 months carrying an impossible weight, and they drank their coffee, and it was, in all the ways that didn't announce themselves and didn't need to, enough.